Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never planned on using a video monitor. My wife was the one who insisted. She said we needed an extra layer of security, and I didn't argue too much because I didn't see a real downside at first. Everything seemed simple. We set up the camera facing the crib, placed the small monitor screen on my bedside table, and went about our routine. For a while, it was just another piece of technology that helped us keep an eye on that corner of the house. Then things changed. I first noticed something odd about 2 weeks after we got the monitor. It was past midnight. I had rolled over in bed and squinted at the screen on my nightstand. The room it showed was dark, but the camera had a night vision mode. Most nights I would look at it, see nothing worth noting, and go back to sleep. But that night I saw a shape next to the crib. It looked like a tall figure standing straight and still. I stared at the screen, holding my breath. My first thought was that there had to be a glitch. Maybe it was just some weird reflection or a bug crawling over the lens. But this shape was too defined. It was slender. I could see what looked like a shoulder, an arm, a straight torso. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and leaned closer to the monitor. The silhouette didn't vanish. It moved a little, a slight tilt to one side. It looked like it was bending down near the crib. My pulse jumped, and my mouth went dry. I got out of bed as quietly as I could. I didn't want to wake my wife. I walked to the door of our bedroom, opened it, and stepped out into the hallway. My feet dragged across the carpet because I wasn't fully awake, but my mind was racing. I reached the door to the other room. It was locked from the inside, just how we always left it. That lock was a simple turn knob on our side of the door, so no one could slip in from the outside. I felt for my keys, but then I remembered that I never locked that door with a key. I just flipped the bolt from inside. I paused. My heart pounded. If the door was locked, nobody else should be in there. I turned the knob. It wouldn't budge. I turned it the other way, and it clicked open. I swung the door open and stepped inside, flipping on the overhead light. The room was empty, just the crib and the usual furniture. I looked around, scanning each corner. There was no one. I walked up to the camera that was mounted on a small shelf. It pointed at the crib just like it should. Everything seemed normal. I glanced at the crib. Nothing looked out of place. My stomach felt tight, and my hands were damp with sweat. I turned off the light, shut the door, locked it again, and went back to my bedroom. When I got there, I looked at the monitor screen. The silhouette was gone. I put the monitor face down. I couldn't figure it out, but I tried to tell myself it was a glitch. The next morning, my wife asked if I had slept well. I said I had woken up once, but that I was fine. I didn't bring up the figure. I didn't want to worry her, and I knew she might laugh it off or blame it on my half-asleep state. I tried to move on, but all day I felt on edge. At work, I kept replaying that moment in my head. That figure wasn't vague. It had clear human outlines. That night, I approached the monitor differently. I told myself to watch carefully for any distortions or weird reflections. I checked the camera position before we went to bed. I tested the angle. The lens was clean. The lighting in the room was consistent with how we always kept it. There was nothing that could cast a tall silhouette. The window curtains were drawn, so no outside light could creep in and create strange shadows. Around 2 a.m., I woke up again. It wasn't any sound that woke me. I just snapped awake. My eyes went right to the monitor. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then, as I focused on the screen, I saw the figure again. It was in the same spot, close to the crib. My heart slammed against my chest. My breathing got shallow. There was that same outline. It seemed a bit closer to the lens this time, like it was facing the camera. I leaned forward and tried to see any facial features. I couldn't see details because of the night vision's glow, but I could tell it wasn't just a static shape. The figure shifted slightly, like someone shifting weight from one foot to the other. I stared at it for several seconds, then quietly got out of bed. My wife stirred, but she didn't wake up. I grabbed a small flashlight I keep in my bedside drawer. I walked down the hall again, adrenaline rushing through me. When I got to the door, I noticed the lock was still flipped. There was no sign anyone had tampered with it. My hand trembled as I turned the knob. It was firmly locked. No movement. I had to rotate the lock mechanism before opening it. Once it was unlocked, I pushed the door open and aimed my flashlight into the room. Empty. Every time it was the same. Nothing was out of place. The camera was still pointed at the crib. I checked behind the furniture. I even looked in the closet. Nobody. I turned around, my heart thudding like crazy, and shut the door. I flipped the lock again just as before. When I got back to the bedroom, the figure was gone from the monitor. I told my wife the next morning. She looked concerned but tried to be logical. She suggested that maybe the camera was defective. She said I should try a different one or adjust the night vision settings. We had a second camera, so I decided to swap them. I installed the spare camera in the same place and put the old one aside. I figured if it was a hardware issue, maybe it would stop once we replaced it. That night, everything seemed calm. The monitor showed the usual view, the crib, the walls, nothing else. I went to bed feeling hopeful that I had solved the problem. But around 3 a.m., I woke up again. It felt like someone had touched my shoulder, though I knew that was probably my imagination. I sat up and checked the monitor. This time the figure stood on the far side of the screen near the corner of the room. It looked like it was turned sideways, as though it was facing the wall. I watched it move. It slid sideways along the wall, then stopped near the crib. Every hair on my arm stood on end. I felt a burning in my stomach and my throat went dry. I didn't know what to do. I whispered my wife's name. She stirred awake. I told her to look at the screen. Her eyes were blurry from sleep, but she saw it. She asked me who it was. I told her I had no idea. The door was still locked. We both got up. She stayed back a little, and I went straight for that door. Same situation. The lock was engaged. The door was shut tight. I unlocked it, rushed in, and turned on the lights. No one was there. We checked every inch. We looked under the crib. We opened every drawer, even though there was no way a person could fit. Nothing. My wife was shaken. She suggested we unplug the cameras. I hesitated because I wanted to figure out what was going on, but she insisted. I gave in and disconnected the monitor. We left the door locked and tried to sleep. I barely got any rest. The next day, I bought a brand new camera from a different brand. I spent extra money on it because it had better security features. It was supposed to be hack-proof. I told myself maybe someone was messing with the feed, but that still didn't explain the locked door. I installed the new camera that afternoon. My wife said she felt uneasy and wanted to stay with her mother for a few days. I didn't blame her. She left that evening, taking a few belongings. I stayed behind, determined to get some answers. That night, the house felt still and quiet. Every little creak put me on edge. I turned on the new monitor, which showed a crystal clear image in both day and night modes. The feed looked perfect. I double-checked the locks on every door and window, then settled in for the night. Around 1 a.m., I heard a faint crackling noise from the monitor's speaker. I had the volume turned low, but it was enough to get my attention. I picked up the monitor and stared at the screen. At first, I just saw the empty room and the crib. Then the silhouette stepped into frame. There was no transition from out of frame to in frame. It was as if it appeared in the corner of the screen. I sucked in my breath. My head started to pound. The figure walked to the crib with slow, deliberate steps. I could see the movement so clearly. There was no mistaking it for a glitch. I got out of bed, holding the monitor in one hand and a small bat in the other. I walked to the locked door and felt my stomach twisting in knots. I tested the knob. Still locked. I gave it a quick shake. Solid. I turned the bolt, yanked the door open, and rushed inside, bat raised. I was ready to strike if I found someone. The room was empty. There was no place to hide. My breathing was rapid and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead. I looked back at the monitor. The figure was gone. I pointed the bat at the camera as though that would do something. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the monitor. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. There was no explanation. I decided to stay in that room for the rest of the night. I grabbed a chair from the corner, sat down facing the crib, and set the monitor in my lap. I wanted to see if anything appeared while I was physically present. For hours I sat there, fighting off sleep. The door stayed locked, and I was inside, waiting. Nothing happened. The monitor showed me the exact space I was in. It showed me in the chair, the crib, everything in plain view, but no silhouette. Around dawn, I gave up and left the room. I unlocked the door, walked out, and locked it behind me again. I went to the kitchen to make coffee. My head ached, and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. I felt shaky all over. For the next several nights, I repeated this pattern. I would wait until late, watch the monitor, see the figure, run to the room, find nothing, and sit there in disbelief. I tried everything. New lights, different angles for the camera, even pointing the camera at the door to see if it opened on its own. Nothing changed. The figure still showed up on the monitor whenever I wasn't in the room. It never appeared if I was physically present. I invited a friend to come over and see if he noticed anything unusual. I didn't tell him the full story. I just said I was hearing noises and I wanted him to check the place out. We walked through the house. We tested the locks. We tried all the lights. He stayed until midnight, but when he looked at the monitor, there was nothing out of the ordinary. The silhouette never appeared that night. He probably thought I was imagining things. After he left, I sat in the living room with the monitor on the coffee table. I refused to go to bed until I was sure I could stay awake all night. Around 2 a.m., the silhouette showed up again, as if it had been waiting for me to be alone. It stood near the crib for a few seconds, then walked out of view of the camera. I felt a jolt of fear that made my shoulders clench. My heart rate soared, and my palms went clammy. I rushed down the hall, tested the door, still locked, and burst inside. Nothing. I started to doubt my own senses, but the monitor's recordings were real. I saved a few clips and tried to watch them the next day. The video would show the silhouette, but whenever I tried to pause or zoom in, the figure's outline was blurry. I couldn't make out a face or clothing. It was just an upright human shape. I still have no explanation. My wife hasn't come back to stay. She wants me to figure this out or move somewhere else. I'm torn. I feel like I'm stuck in a constant state of unease. The door is always locked. I keep checking the locks before and after each incident. There's never any sign of a break-in. I've considered the possibility of some elaborate prank, but it doesn't add up. Nobody has that kind of access, and I don't see how they could vanish so quickly. All I know is that the silhouette keeps showing up on the monitor. It stands by the crib, sometimes still, sometimes shifting a little. When I rush in, it's gone. There's nowhere to hide, no time for anyone to escape. The door is always locked. I've even installed a chain lock and a wedge at the bottom. It makes no difference. I see it, I open the door, and the room is empty. I'm at the end of my rope. I'm not sleeping well. I'm jumpy and paranoid. I'm carrying the monitor around the house like some security guard on night patrol. Every time I see that silhouette, my chest tightens. My head starts throbbing, and my legs feel weak. Then I run to the room, throw the door open, find it empty, and I'm left there in the dark trying to explain the unexplainable. I wish I had an answer. Right now, all I can say is that the silhouette is real to me. I see it on that screen, and I can't ignore it. The technology is supposed to help me feel safer, but it's only making me feel more helpless. I can't explain who or what appears on that monitor, and every night, I'm afraid to look at the screen. But I can't bring myself to turn it off. So I keep watching, heart pounding, waiting for that impossible shape to show up again. And it always does. I got home last night around 11. I was tired and my legs felt heavy. I pulled into my garage, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a moment. The garage light was dim, as usual. It's not motion activated. I set it to stay on whenever the garage door is shut. I opened the car door to get out, and the second I stepped onto the concrete floor, I heard footsteps moving around the back of my car. They were loud and solid, like someone walking with purpose. My heart started hammering in my chest. I remember thinking I must be hearing my own footsteps echoing, but I wasn't moving my feet. I froze for a second, then spun around quickly. Nobody was there. The sound stopped. I stood by the open door of my car, holding onto it for balance, scanning the garage. Nothing. The walls were bare except for a few shelves on the far side, and the overhead door was closed. I felt my mouth go dry. I swallowed hard, got back into the car, and closed the door again. I checked my phone for missed calls or messages, like maybe I just imagined it because I was stressed. But everything was normal, so I forced myself to get out once more. No footsteps that time. I locked the car and headed into the house, feeling uneasy. The next day at work, I kept replaying that moment in my mind. I'd been working longer hours lately, trying to secure a promotion. My boss had me on a project that felt never-ending. Every time I finished one part, he assigned something else. So I was coming home late every night, parking in that dim garage. I tried telling myself it was just the echo of my own movements. The place is small and concrete floors can bounce sound around, but that first night the footsteps definitely circled around the trunk of my car. They weren't an echo of me. I had the same shift the following night, so I knew I'd have to face that garage again when I got home. It was on my mind all day. My stomach felt unsettled. My hands were sweaty at the office. I tried to focus on spreadsheets and emails, but my thoughts kept drifting to that empty garage. When I got home the second night, it was almost midnight. I opened the garage door from my phone app and drove inside. As soon as the overhead door closed behind me, I felt trapped. I turned off the engine and listened. Nothing at first. Then I opened the door. The light overhead flickered for a moment, then returned to steady. I set one foot on the ground, and again I heard those same footsteps moving quickly around the back of my car. It sounded like someone taking 4 or 5 steps in a circle, maybe a few feet behind the trunk. My pulse shot up. I reached under my seat for the small flashlight I keep in the car. I keep it there for emergencies. My hand was shaking as I pressed the button. I got out fully and shone the flashlight around. The garage was empty. No boxes tall enough for anyone to hide behind. No corners unlit. It was just me, my car, and the bare walls. The footsteps stopped as soon as I got up and turned around. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My thoughts were racing. I decided to walk around the car, carefully, step by step. I held the flashlight at shoulder height, trying to cover every spot. Nothing. I was sweating under my jacket. My breathing was shallow, and my heart was beating hard. I locked the car and walked to the door that leads into the house. I kept expecting to feel a hand on my shoulder or see someone jump out at me, but I made it inside without incident. I locked the door behind me, turned off the garage light from the switch in the house, and went straight to my bedroom. I didn't want to linger in the hallway or the kitchen. I felt jumpy. I tried to sleep, but every little noise in the house made me flinch. It was a long night. On the third night, I got home around 10:30. I felt nervous pulling into the driveway. I remember staring at the garage door, trying to gather the courage to go inside. I considered parking on the street, but it didn't feel safe leaving my car out all night. So I opened the door and drove in. The overhead light came on and revealed the same dull concrete floors and unpainted walls. I stayed in the car with the engine running for a minute, scanning the perimeter through the windshield. Nothing looked strange. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel and I finally shut off the car. I opened the door and listened. For about 3 seconds it was quiet. Then I heard those footsteps again, brisk and intentional, going around the back of the car. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and backed away with my flashlight out. I couldn't see anything. The footsteps just stopped again, like whoever, or whatever, was making them had paused the moment I reacted. I could feel my heart pounding so hard it hurt. My forehead was damp with sweat, and I could smell the stale air of the garage mixing with my own nervous sweat. I waved the flashlight around. The space was empty. My throat was tight. I wanted to call the police, but I didn't know what to say. I keep hearing footsteps in my garage, but no one's there. They'd come out, check, and probably tell me there was nothing. I took a few more steps toward the door to the house, and I heard one more footstep behind me. I spun around, flashing the light, but I still saw nothing. My voice came out strained as I shouted, "Who's there?" Of course, no response. I stood there listening for any movement or breathing, but I heard only the rush of blood in my ears. My legs felt weak. I rushed inside and slammed the door, flipping the lock. I rested my back against the wall and tried to steady my breathing. My watch beeped once, indicating it was 10:45, which was a scheduled reminder I had set for something unrelated. The sound startled me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Eventually, I turned off the garage light from inside and made sure every door in my house was locked. Then I sat in my living room in the dark, trying to make sense of it. Maybe someone had a key to the garage, but there was no sign of forced entry, and the overhead door was brand new. It was impossible to relax. Over the next few days, I started taking precautions. I installed a better lock on the door between the house and the garage. I placed a motion sensor in the corner of the garage that would link to an app on my phone. If anything moved in there, I'd know about it instantly. After work, around lunchtime, I went to the garage to check the sensor. I moved around, waved my arms, jumped, and confirmed that the sensor worked. My phone showed motion each time I did something. So that night, when I got home a little earlier than usual, I opened the app. It showed no recorded motion for the entire day, which meant nobody had been in the garage. Feeling slightly more confident, I parked the car inside again. The overhead door closed, and the light came on. I stayed seated behind the wheel for a moment, checking the motion sensor app. No alerts. I opened my car door. The second I set my foot down, I heard those footsteps circling the trunk. My phone still showed no new motion alerts. Nothing. I pointed the phone toward the area. It should have picked up something, but it didn't. My heart pounded. My skin felt clammy and my fingers felt numb. The footsteps were so distinct. I wasn't imagining them. They were as real as my own breathing. I jumped out of the car, holding my phone in one hand and the flashlight in the other. I walked around the trunk, shining the light across the floor and the walls. Still no one. The footsteps had stopped again as soon as I moved. I checked my phone. The app hadn't detected anything. I felt dizzy. My mind was spinning. I decided I would call a friend, maybe ask him to come over. But it was almost 10 at night, and I knew he had an early shift. I felt stupid calling him over footsteps I couldn't explain. I felt stuck, so I just locked the car, went inside, and tried to calm down. I slept poorly, with strange dreams about someone sneaking around me in the dark, never showing their face. I kept dealing with it for a week. Every night the same thing happened. I would come home, park in the garage, open the door, and hear those footsteps circling behind me. They always stopped when I tried to confront them. The motion sensor never captured anything. I considered installing a camera, but money was tight, and I wasn't sure if a camera would even help. I was starting to dread coming home, even though I was exhausted from work. My appetite shrank. My coworkers noticed I looked pale and anxious, but I didn't share much. I was embarrassed. What if they thought I was losing it? One Friday night, I arrived home around 9. It was earlier than usual, so I hoped it might not happen if I got back sooner. I opened the garage and pulled in. The overhead light seemed a bit brighter than normal, probably just my imagination. I took a deep breath, turned off the engine, and swung the door open fast as if I could catch whoever was there by surprise. As soon as my foot hit the concrete, I heard the familiar footsteps circling the trunk. It was the same pattern. Several steps, almost like pacing, then silence. My legs tensed. I walked swiftly to the back of the car, shining my flashlight all around. Nothing. The air felt thick, and I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, hoping I'd see something in the photos later, but they all showed the same empty space. Feeling my chest tighten, I stormed to the door that leads into the house, yanked it open, and went in. I stood there, in the small hallway between the garage and the kitchen, trying to catch my breath. My heart wouldn't slow down. I was drenched in sweat and my hands were trembling. I decided I couldn't keep ignoring this. I grabbed a metal flashlight from the kitchen drawer, the heavy kind that could double as a club if I needed it, and went back into the garage. The door closed behind me with a thud. I felt a rush of adrenaline, like I was about to confront something dangerous. "If someone's here, come out now," I called. My voice echoed. The garage felt cold. I scanned every inch, stepping carefully, flashlight raised, ready to defend myself. Still nothing. I checked the overhead door, tested the locks, looked behind the car, under it, even on top of the shelves. No one was there. My whole body was on edge. My stomach cramped, and my breath was shallow. After a few minutes, I gave up. I went back inside, locked everything, and collapsed onto the couch. I stared at the ceiling, feeling my pulse race. It felt like I was stuck in some strange loop, hearing something that wasn't there, but also knowing that sound was real. I tried staying out later the next few nights, hoping if I came home at a different time, maybe the footsteps wouldn't occur. But no matter when I came in, it happened. Footsteps as soon as I stepped out of the car, always moving around the trunk area, always stopping the moment I shone a light or moved to check. My routine turned into a tense ritual. Open garage door, drive in, turn off car, wait, listen, open door, hear footsteps, jerk my head around with a flashlight. Nothing. I started yelling at it, calling it out, threatening to call the police, demanding it show itself. But I never got an answer. I felt like I was losing my grip. My coworkers started asking if I was sick. My boss pulled me aside once to ask if I needed time off, but I said no. I knew leaving work early wouldn't fix anything. I just felt trapped by the situation. One night, I tried recording audio on my phone. I held the phone out while I opened the car door. The footsteps were loud to my ears, but when I played the recording back, all I heard was me breathing and the faint hum of the garage light. No footsteps. It made no sense. If this was some elaborate prank, I couldn't catch the culprit. If it wasn't a prank, I had no explanation. My face felt hot and my mind raced with questions. Could the concrete be settling? Could it be some weird echo? But why would it sound so clearly like footsteps moving around the car? I started carrying that metal flashlight with me everywhere like a security blanket. Even in the house, if I heard a creak, I'd tense up and grip the flashlight. I was exhausted. My shoulders ached from the constant stress. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. My dreams were filled with images of hearing footsteps but never seeing who made them. Each morning, I woke up feeling just as tired as when I went to bed. Yesterday, I got home around midnight. By then, I was too drained to feel fear the same way. I almost felt angry at whatever was messing with me. I parked in the usual spot, turned off the car, took a deep breath, and opened the door. I heard the footsteps behind the trunk, the same pacing steps. My heart pounded, but I marched around the car, shining the flashlight in one hand, the phone in the other. Nothing. My phone's motion sensor app didn't show any movement. The overhead light buzzed. The footsteps stopped when I moved. I cursed at the empty garage, feeling my fists clench. Then I just walked inside, locked the door, and sat down at the kitchen table. My hands shook for a while. I stayed up for 2 hours, thinking about every possible angle. I thought about moving out, but that's not an option right now. I don't have the money or the time to deal with a move. I also don't want to admit defeat. It's my house. I shouldn't have to run from it. Today I'm sitting here writing this down because I need to get it all straight in my head. I'm going to try installing a better camera system. If that doesn't capture anything, I don't know what else to do. I'm dreading going out to the garage again tonight. The footsteps will be there, circling behind my car, stopping whenever I look. It's taken a serious toll on me. I feel my shoulders aching just thinking about it. My heart is pounding now, and it's the middle of the afternoon. Sometimes I question my sanity, but the footsteps are too clear to be my imagination. They're real. I just can't see whoever's making them. I don't know how this will end. I don't have a resolution. I haven't caught anyone, and I haven't found a rational explanation. All I know is that I come home late, park my car, and hear those footsteps every single time. I feel them in my bones. They scare the hell out of me, but I can't ignore them. I plan to put up cameras, maybe 2 or 3 in different corners. I'll get a friend to help me set them up this weekend. If that doesn't reveal anything, I'll start looking for a new place to live, even if it kills me financially. I can't keep living like this, jumping at every sound and feeling paranoid in my own home. But for now, that's it. That's my night, every night. I open the car door, step out, and hear the footsteps circling me from behind. I don't know who or what is out there, but it's not going away. My garage is supposed to be a safe place to keep my car. Instead, it's become a place where I feel vulnerable, where my heart races and my hands shake. I hate it, but I can't avoid it. I live here, and as long as I live here, I'll be hearing those footsteps in the dark. I slammed the front door that first night because I felt like someone was watching me from the hallway. I was tired. I was hungry. I wanted to lock myself inside and ignore whatever odd presence I sensed. But the door felt heavier than usual. It closed without making much noise, like it didn't want to alert anyone. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob, heart beating in my chest, and listened for footsteps. I heard nothing. The hallway stayed quiet. The only sound was my own breathing, short and tight. I'd been living in this apartment for about 3 months. It used to belong to the old owner of the entire building, a man who passed away years ago. The landlord said he left it to his heirs, and at some point, they sold it. Over time, it became a regular rental unit. I moved in because I liked the high ceilings and the windows that faced a small courtyard. The rent was fair, the location was convenient, and I didn't care about rumors of weird stuff happening here. I've never believed in ghosts or anything like that. I'm a practical guy. The first few weeks were calm. I'd come home from work, toss my keys on the kitchen counter, grab a cold beer from the fridge and watch TV on a small couch that sits near the window. The place felt cozy. I had an old bookshelf against the wall, a table with 2 chairs by the kitchen and a queen-sized bed in a separate room. I didn't have many possessions, so the apartment looked almost empty. It gave me space to move around. I didn't notice any unusual sounds at first. Then, one night, I woke up at around 2 a.m. My bedroom door was closed, but I thought I heard the front door squeak. I sat up, my pulse quickening, and listened. No voices, no footsteps, just the faint rustle of something metallic. I told myself it was probably just the wind. I tried to go back to sleep. I couldn't. My skin was clammy and my mouth felt dry. After a few minutes, I got up and walked into the living room. The front door was closed, but the deadbolt was unlocked. I always lock it. I don't ever go to bed without locking it. Yet there it was, wide open in the sense that the bolt was slid back and the chain was off the latch. I felt a jolt in my stomach. My heart started racing. I ran my hand across my face and tried to think. Maybe I forgot to lock it, but I knew I hadn't. I double-checked doors without fail. It's just something I do. I locked it again, turned the bolt, flipped the chain, and stood there with my ear pressed to the wood. I didn't hear anything outside. I waited a few more minutes and went back to bed. I didn't sleep well, and I woke up with a headache. The next night, nothing happened. I started to relax again. Then 2 nights later, I heard the knob rattle. It was around 3 a.m. This time, I didn't hesitate. I got out of bed fast. I hurried to the living room and found the door slightly open. The chain dangled. The lock was undone. I felt a wave of panic. My hand started trembling. I flipped on the overhead light and checked the peephole. I saw only the empty hallway. I swung the door open and looked around. No one was there. The corridor smelled like old paint and dust. It was silent. My neighbor's door across the hall was closed. All the doors were closed. No one was moving around. I installed a more robust chain the next day. I went to a hardware store and asked for the strongest chain they had. I also bought a cheap alarm sensor. It was the kind that sticks to the door in the frame. If the door opened, it would make a loud chirping sound. I felt better after I put it on. That night I locked everything and tested the chain a few times. It felt secure. The sensor beeped when I pulled the door open, so I knew it was working. I slept fine for about a week. Then on a Sunday night, I heard the sensor beep. It was a quick beep, then silence. I jumped out of bed, adrenaline surging, and rushed to the living room. The sensor wasn't making noise anymore. The door was open about an inch. The chain was unhooked. The beep had stopped as if the sensor turned itself off. My tongue felt thick in my mouth. I felt my stomach churn. I tried to flip the switch on the sensor back on, but it was already in the on position. It wasn't working. I found myself sweating and shaking. I looked down the hall again. Empty. No sign of forced entry. No footprints. No scuff marks. I stood there, confused, and I locked the door again. I ended up sitting on my couch the rest of the night, drifting in and out of a light sleep. The next morning, the sensor was working fine again. It chirped when I opened the door to go to work. It made no sense. After that, the incidents became more frequent. Every couple of nights, the door would open. I got used to waking up at odd hours, heart pounding, to close and lock it again. I started noticing small things out of place, like my keys not being where I left them or the living room window curtains slightly drawn when I remember leaving them open. One time, I found the TV remote on the floor in the hallway, far from where I left it. Another time, I saw a small scuff on the door frame, like someone had bumped it with a shoe or something. I cleaned it off, but it bothered me. I talked to the landlord. He said he never had any weird complaints from previous tenants, but he also made a face like he was hiding something. He shrugged and suggested maybe I had a faulty lock. I asked a locksmith to come by. The guy inspected the entire lock assembly, said it was fine. He replaced the cylinder just in case, and I paid for it. That night, I locked up again. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard the chain jingle. The door was open again. This time, there was no beep from the sensor. The new lock was undone. The chain was hanging. I felt fear in my chest. My mouth tasted bitter. I was so tense I had to sit down on the couch and breathe slowly. I turned on all the lights. I checked every inch of the apartment. No one was hiding anywhere. All the windows were locked from the inside. Nothing was stolen. Everything seemed normal. I felt like I was losing my mind. Around this time, I started hearing stories from a couple of neighbors. One of them, an older guy who's lived here forever, told me the previous owner, this apartment's original occupant, used to be very attached to his home. The neighbor said he never liked to leave, even for short trips. He died in the building, but not in my apartment. He passed away in a different unit while visiting someone. I didn't ask for details because I didn't want to stir up more gossip. I tried ignoring the door situation and acted like it was just a quirk of the building. But it kept happening. Some nights I'd wake up to the door open. Some nights I'd hear the lock turn by itself and see the handle move. It was always quiet and smooth, like someone had the right key and knew how to open it gently. The chain never made much noise either, just a light jingle. I started sleeping in the living room with the lamp on. I tried to catch the door opening. I'd drift off, half awake, my ears straining for that little metallic click. I did hear it once. It wasn't like a normal key turning. It was more like a soft shift, as if the lock was undone from the inside. When I jumped up, I saw the door drifting open. I lunged for it and pulled it shut. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I wondered if I should call the police, but what would I tell them? There was no sign of forced entry, no actual intruder. It felt pointless. I installed more chains. I even tried a heavy-duty slide bolt near the top of the door. I drilled it into the frame myself. That lasted about 2 nights before I found it slid open one morning. No damage to the bolt or the door. It was simply undone. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the building had weird shifts in its structure. Maybe there was an alignment issue. But none of that explained the undone chains or the replaced lock. It made me anxious all day. every day. At work, I started showing up tired. My boss asked if I was okay. I told him I wasn't sleeping well. I caught a friend at lunch and told him a bit of the story, leaving out the creepier details. He suggested I set up a camera. So I bought a small motion-activated camera and placed it in the living room, pointed at the door. I tested it, made sure it recorded. Then that night I locked the door, turned on the camera, and went to bed. I woke up at 3 a.m. The living room was dark. I realized I forgot to leave the lamp on. I heard the chain move. I jumped up, ran into the living room, and flicked on the light. The door was open again, the chain off. I looked at the camera. It wasn't recording. I checked the settings. The battery was dead. I had charged it fully before going to bed, but it had drained to 0. I plugged it back in and tried not to scream in frustration. The next morning, I charged the camera again. I tested it and it seemed fine. I tried a second time the following night. Same result. The battery drained as soon as I went to bed. The camera never recorded anything. I tried an old phone with a recording app plugged into an outlet near the door. When I checked the phone in the morning, it had frozen. The screen was stuck. No footage was saved. At that point, I was losing hope of ever catching the culprit. Every night felt like a trap. I'd lock the door and wonder if it would stay locked. Usually, it didn't. Some nights were quiet, and I'd sleep through till morning. Then about 3 nights a week, I'd be jolted awake by the sound of the lock turning or the chain rattling. My chest would tighten. My pulse would throb in my ears. I'd feel short of breath. I never found anyone there. I never saw anything out of the ordinary in the hallway. I tried to rationalize it. I even considered if I was sleepwalking. I did some tests, like stacking boxes in front of the door. They'd be moved aside in the morning, but I never had any memory of doing it. I placed a small piece of tape between the door and the frame so it would tear if the door opened. It tore every time. I set small bells on the doorknob. They barely made a sound when the door opened. It was as if someone lifted them gently. The tension built up in my body. My shoulders stayed tight all day. My back ached. I drank more coffee during the day to stay awake and tried not to nod off at my desk. My sleep schedule was wrecked. I started checking into hotels on weekends just to get a full night of rest, but I couldn't do that forever. The place was my home, and I had to pay rent. I didn't have enough money to break the lease and move out right away. I also felt stubborn. Part of me refused to let this weird situation chase me away. I wanted to figure it out. One night I decided to wait behind the door. I turned off all the lights, locked everything like usual, and stood in the dark with my back against the wall near the entrance. I held my phone with the flashlight ready. I stood there for almost an hour. My knees got stiff. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I could see the faint outline of furniture. My breathing was shallow. I tried to control it. I kept telling myself that if the door opened, I'd jump out and catch whoever was doing this. Eventually, I realized my mind was playing tricks on me. Every small creak from the building made me tense up. My phone felt slippery in my hand. My arms ached from holding it. I switched hands a few times. Another hour passed, and I was exhausted. Then, around 2:45 a.m., I thought I heard the lock click. My heart kicked into high gear. I pressed myself against the wall, phone aimed at the door. The knob turned slowly. There was a soft click. The chain went slack. I felt a rush of cold sweat cover my back. My breath got stuck in my throat. I flicked the flashlight on and jumped forward, but I saw only the door drifting open. No one was there. The hallway was empty. My flashlight beam hit the dark corridor, and I saw nothing. Not a single shape. I stepped out for a second, shining the light from left to right. No movement, no doors closing, just silence. I locked the door again, but my hands were shaking so bad that I fumbled the chain twice. I tried to calm myself, but my body was on edge. I was wide awake, but also exhausted. I stayed up the rest of the night, pacing around the apartment, checking every corner. When morning came, I realized this situation might never stop. I started to suspect it was connected to the old owner of the building. but I had no proof and I didn't want to let my imagination run wild. All I knew was that someone, or something, kept returning to the apartment at night, unlocking the door and slipping inside, or at least into the entryway. I never saw them do anything else. They never damaged the place or took anything. It was like they just wanted to come home. I eventually told the landlord I wanted out. I said I'd pay a penalty for breaking the lease early. He gave me a tired look and agreed. I still live there for the moment, but I plan to leave soon. I can't sleep properly. I double-check every lock multiple times before bed. I push furniture against the door, but I still find it ajar some mornings. The tension in my stomach never goes away. My neck and shoulders are stiff. My eyes burn from lack of sleep. I'm counting the days until I can pack my stuff and leave. That's where I am now. I'm telling this story because it's the only way I can keep my sanity. Every night, I wait to hear the door open. Every morning I check the chains and find them undone. I can't explain it. I've never seen a single person in the hallway. No strangers lurking around. But something unlocks that door with eerie precision. Something doesn't like to stay locked out of this apartment. I don't think I'll ever find a rational explanation. I'm tired of trying to figure it out. I just want to sleep through the night again. I want to leave this place and forget about it. But as long as I'm here, I have to face the fact that the door opens by itself and no lock can stop it. That's my reality. I don't care if people believe me. I know what I see when I wake up at 3 in the morning. The door is always open, waiting for someone to walk through. I don't know who it is. I don't know if it's real or something else. But I feel it watching me, keeping me on edge. And I can't wait to get out. I sit at my desk on the 9th floor staring at a half-finished spreadsheet when I hear those footsteps again. I'm tired, and my eyes feel dry from staring at the screen for too long. It's almost midnight. I can't believe I'm still in this building, but I have a deadline. Every time I think about going home, I remember that I need this job, and I end up staying late. Then those footsteps return. They're steady, like someone climbing one step at a time with a precise rhythm. I push my chair back. My heart starts beating faster. I can't help it anymore. I get up, head for the door, and walk into the hallway. The hallway is quiet. The overhead lights buzz. I look toward the emergency stairwell at the end of the hall, and I can still hear the footsteps behind that heavy metal door. I swallow hard. My mouth feels dry. This has been happening for a few weeks now. At first, I ignored it. I thought it was just the sound of pipes or the building settling. But every time I checked the security footage with the guard, we saw nothing. The stairwell looked empty. He told me he walked through the entire stairwell and never saw a single person. Still, the sound always starts around this time, and it lasts for about 5 or 10 minutes before it fades away. Sometimes I try to focus on work and block it out, but I can't. It's so clear and deliberate. I decide to open the door this time. I place my hand on the cold push bar. My pulse races. I press down and step inside the concrete stairwell. The overhead lights are dull. There's a slight hum from the ventilation. I stand there letting my ears adjust, and I hear nothing. Not a single step. I glance up, then look down. The staircase winds below me, disappearing into the darkness of the lower floors. I listen for footsteps, but I only hear the buzzing from the fluorescent lights. I linger for about a minute, scanning each landing. Nothing moves. My hand tightens around the metal railing and my knuckles feel stiff. The stale air in the stairwell is uncomfortable. There's a faint smell of old concrete. I hear a click behind me as the door closes, then the latch snaps into place. It's just me and this empty space. My heart rate is still elevated. I can't shake the feeling that I interrupted something, like the footsteps stopped the second I entered. I exhale slowly and walk back out. I feel embarrassed. I was expecting something or someone. My office is the only one with lights on this late. All the other doors on this floor are locked. I guess no one else hears these footsteps because there's usually nobody else here at this hour. I return to my desk. I sit down and stare at my screen. My palms feel sweaty. I reach for my water bottle and take a long sip. During the next few nights, the pattern continues. Every time it's the same. The footsteps start at around 11:30 or midnight. They last a few minutes, always slow and steady. I open the door, check inside, and see nothing. The guard, who introduces himself as Mike, shows me the live camera feed. We watch the monitor that's fixed on the stairwell. The angle captures all the landings from top to bottom. It's empty. He even jokes that maybe I need more sleep, but I know what I hear. It's not in my head. It sounds too real. I tell him I'm not crazy. He shrugs and says he believes me, but has no explanation. He shows me the logbook where he records his rounds. He has no suspicious entries. No one else has complained. One Friday night, I decide to ask Mike if I can check the building's camera feeds from the entire day. I sit with him in the small security office in the lobby. The fluorescent lights flicker in there. His desk is cluttered with coffee cups, a radio, and a stack of incident reports. He rewinds the footage on the main monitor. We see people leaving after 6. The office is empty out. By 9 p.m., hardly anyone is left. By 10 p.m., the place is dead quiet except for me in my office. Then it hits midnight, and the camera feed for the stairwell is still blank. We can't see a single movement. It's just that fluorescent glare shining on the concrete steps. Meanwhile, I remember hearing the footsteps that night. I felt each one echo through the corridor. But the screen shows nothing. I watch Mike's reaction. He rubs his chin. He doesn't look scared, but he seems confused. He says he did a physical sweep of the entire building around 11:45 p.m. and saw nothing unusual. We keep scanning forward, and we see me pop into view around 12:03 a.m. I open the stairwell door, stand on the landing, and walk back out. Before or after that, no movement. He shakes his head and says maybe it's some glitch in the building's old systems. Maybe it's a weird echo from the plumbing. I nod, but I don't buy it. The sound is too distinct. The next week, I still have more deadlines, so I stay even later than usual. This time, I bring a small audio recorder. It's nothing special, just the kind people use for interviews. I figure I can set it on my desk, hit record, and capture the footsteps. Then I'll have proof that something is happening. Around 11 p.m., I get up to stretch my legs. The building is silent, except for the hum of the HVAC system. I go to the bathroom, wash my face, and look at myself in the mirror. My eyes look bloodshot, and I notice some dark circles. I feel tense, but I also feel determined to capture evidence. I dry my face, head back to my desk, and place the recorder near my keyboard. Time passes slowly. I keep glancing at the digital clock on my desktop. Eventually, it reads 11:29 p.m. I pause my work and wait. Sure enough, around 11:31 p.m., I hear the familiar clacking of footsteps in the stairwell. They're at the same measured pace. One step, pause, another step, pause. My stomach tightens. I let the recorder run. I want to see if the footsteps come closer. They don't. They stay at about the same volume for several minutes. Then they fade away. I stop the recording and play it back. My heart pounds while I listen. The white noise from the office is there. Computers humming, the air conditioner blowing. I hear my own soft breathing, but I don't hear the footsteps. I rewind and replay. Nothing. Just static and room noise. I feel my chest tighten. I swear I heard them with my own ears, but the device picked up nothing. I mumble a curse under my breath and toss the recorder onto the desk. My hands are shaking. I can't believe this is happening. I shut down everything and pack up my bag. I decide to leave. I need fresh air. I feel trapped in that office. Over the next few days, I try not to focus on the stairwell. I keep my headphones on while I work. I play music, watch random videos during breaks, and avoid thinking about it. But the footsteps continue. They always come at the same time, never earlier, never later. Now, whenever they start, my body reacts. My shoulders tense and my hands get clammy. I can't shut it out. It's like they're daring me to do something. I finally talked to my boss about working from home, at least in the evenings. She says the company policy doesn't allow it. She needs me here in case any last-minute issues pop up. I don't argue. I know my job is still on shaky ground and I can't risk losing it. So I keep coming back every night, waiting for those footsteps to start. One Monday night, I decide I've had enough of just hearing them. I want to see if I can catch whoever or whatever is causing that sound. I know the cameras don't pick up anything, but maybe the cameras are just angled wrong or skipping frames. I head to the stairwell around 11:20 p.m. and wait. I stand against the wall on the 10th floor landing, just one floor above my office floor. My plan is to stay there until I hear the footsteps. Then, if they get closer, I'll move to see if someone's actually walking. The entire time my heart is pounding. The stairwell smells dusty and it's not well ventilated. The lights flicker a bit and it makes me jump. I stand there for a while. My watch says 11:25, then 11:30. I hear nothing at first. After a minute or two, I start hearing the footsteps below me, maybe around the 8th or 7th floor landing. They're clear, like someone wearing heavy shoes on concrete steps. Each footstep echoes. I grip the handrail. My palms are sweaty. I realize my chest is tightening and I force myself to breathe slowly. I lean over, trying to look down the center of the stairwell. I see the landings all the way to the bottom, but I don't see any movement. The footsteps sound closer now. They seem to reach the 9th floor landing. My heart is racing. I press my back against the wall, listening. The footsteps pause. Then I hear them again. But now they sound like they're going down instead of up. I lean forward and try to catch a glimpse of whoever's on the stairs. There's no one there. I see only the dimly lit steps. My legs start to feel weak. A shiver runs through me. I force myself to walk down a few steps to the 9th floor landing. I peek over. It's empty. The footsteps keep going, but I can't pinpoint where. I decide to follow them. I move carefully down the stairs. Each step I take echoes, and it makes me nervous. It's like I'm fighting with another set of footsteps, trying to figure out whose is whose. I stop and listen, but I can't tell if the sound is coming from above or below me now. After a few moments, the footsteps fade away completely. I'm breathing hard. My face feels hot, and my shirt is sticking to my back. I realize I'm alone in the middle of the stairwell, and there's no sign of anyone else. I look at my watch. It's 11:40 p.m. The footsteps usually last until around midnight, but this time they stopped. I climb back up to my office floor and step into the hallway. The building feels heavier, like the air is thick. My head aches. I stumble back to my desk, grab my things, and decide to leave again. I don't want to be there anymore. The next day, I sit down with Mike, the guard, in the lobby. I ask him if the building has any weird history. He laughs and says he's worked here for 6 years and never heard of anything strange. He says the building is old, built in the 1960s, but he doesn't know of any major incidents. Nobody died here as far as he knows. He shrugs. I nod, trying not to sound too frustrated. I mention the footsteps again and he just shakes his head. He says he doesn't hear them on his rounds, not even once. For a while I consider telling people at work about what's going on, but I figure they'll laugh at me. I already tried telling my boss I was uncomfortable staying late, and she brushed it off. Most nights I can't leave before 10 or 11, so I just have to deal with this. I start bringing noise-canceling headphones to block out the footsteps. It helps a bit, but whenever the clock hits 11:30, I get anxious. My stomach churns. My muscles tense up. One night, I decide to sit in my office and do nothing when I hear the footsteps. I just sit there and let them happen. I don't investigate. I don't record. I try to focus on each breath. The footsteps begin as usual, slow and steady. My ears perk up, but I don't move. My heart speeds up, and I notice my fingertips trembling against the armrest of my chair. I force my eyes to stay on the computer screen, but my mind is racing. I wonder if someone is messing with me. Maybe it's a prank. But there's no one else around this late, and the guard claims he's not doing it. After about 10 minutes, the footsteps stop. I feel an odd relief, like a weight lifting off my chest. I sit there in silence, waiting to see if they come back. They don't. The building remains quiet. I start shutting down my computer, get my bag, and leave. As I pass by Mike on the way out, he looks up from his station. He asks if I'm okay because I look pale. I tell him I'm fine and walk out the door. Weeks pass, and the situation never changes. I keep hearing the footsteps almost every night. Sometimes I rush to the stairwell to catch the source, but I never see anyone. Other times I try to ignore it, but my body reacts no matter what I do. My heart speeds up, and the hairs on my arms stand on end. I started having nightmares about running up the stairs and not reaching the top. But there's nothing I can do. I need my paycheck, and nobody else seems concerned. One evening around 10:45 p.m., I decide to leave earlier than usual. I pack up and head to the elevator. I step in and press the lobby button. The doors close and the elevator rattles as it descends. Around the 7th floor, it stops. The doors slide open, and nobody is there. I wait a second, expecting someone to enter. Then the doors close again. My stomach flips and I feel sweat forming on my forehead. The elevator continues down. I reach the lobby, and Mike gives me a small nod. I nod back and walk outside. The cold air hits my face and I stand there breathing deeply. For the rest of the week, I leave at 10 or so. I don't hear the footsteps. I don't stay late enough. But eventually my boss needs me to finish a big project. I have to stay until midnight again. So I sit there in my chair waiting for those footsteps, hating this routine. At 11:30 p.m., they start. I feel my pulse racing. I wish they'd stop forever, but they keep going, just like they always do. Now, I still work in that building. The footsteps remain a mystery. Mike and I stop trying to figure them out. They never show up on camera, and he never hears them on his rounds. But I hear them clear as day almost every single time I'm there past 11:30. I've learned to live with it. I still get scared. I still feel my chest tighten when I notice that first echo in the stairwell. But there's no point in trying to fix it or find an explanation. There isn't one that makes sense. The building is old. Maybe something's just off with the acoustics. Or maybe there's more to it. I don't know. All I can do is get my work done and hope that one day I won't have to stay late anymore. Until then, I'll be here, listening to those footsteps in an empty stairwell. I'll keep my head down, try to ignore that steady sound, and remind myself that I have a job to do. That's all there is. When people ask why I look exhausted in the morning, I just say I was up late. I never mention the footsteps. Some things are easier to hide. I jerked awake at around 2 in the morning because I heard music coming from my attic. It was a light, scratchy sound that reminded me of an old waltz. I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes. My mouth felt dry, and my hands were shaking a little. I knew the only record player in my house was the one my grandparents had left me years ago. I also knew that device was in rough shape and missing its power cord. Still, I couldn't deny what I was hearing. The notes were soft but clear enough to recognize a steady, old-fashioned rhythm. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up, feeling a slight ache in my lower back. I paced around the bedroom for a few seconds, then decided to check it out. I wasn't about to lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was losing my mind. I walked out into the hallway and flipped on the lights. The floor felt cold under my bare feet. The air smelled stale, like old wood. My attic entrance is at the end of the hall, just above a short flight of steps. I walked up carefully, trying not to make noise. The waltz grew a bit louder, which made my heart pound. I pressed my ear against the attic door. For a moment, the music continued. I felt my body tense up, expecting something to jump out. Then it cut off. Total silence. I stood there, breathing through my nose, trying to slow my pulse. I pushed open the door and flicked on the single hanging light bulb. Inside, the attic was cramped and dusty. Boxes were stacked near the corners, and a few old trunks sat against the far wall. A cobweb brushed against my shoulder, and I jerked away from it. The record player rested on a wooden table, half buried under a sheet and some other junk. I went over to it and pulled the sheet aside. It looked the same as always, cracked in a few places, a missing power cord, and a broken needle arm. The turntable itself was covered in dust. There was no record on it. My arms prickled with goosebumps. I moved the tone arm. It was stiff and let out a rusty squeak. I coughed from the stale air and pulled back. No power cord, no record. Yet I had heard music. I spent the next few minutes rummaging through the boxes. I found some old photos, some musty blankets, and a few newspaper clippings. I kept listening for anything, any scratch of a record or a whisper of a tune. Nothing. I waited. Finally, I switched off the light and closed the door behind me. I returned to my bedroom feeling uneasy. I slid back under the covers but stayed awake for a long time, staring at the digital clock as it ticked from 2:15 to 3 to 3:30. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to my alarm at 7 with a sore neck and a slight headache. I went to work as usual, but the memory of that waltz stuck with me all day. I kept reliving the moment when I pressed my ear to the attic door. I'd heard something up there. It wasn't my imagination. I replayed it in my mind while I typed emails and sipped my lukewarm coffee. I debated telling someone, but I knew how it would sound. So I stayed quiet, focusing on my tasks until 5 in the afternoon. When I got home, I set my keys on the kitchen counter and went straight upstairs to the attic again. I opened the door wide and turned on the light. The record player was just as I'd left it. The same dust patterns, the same broken needle, the same missing cord. I stood there, hands on my hips, staring at the old machine. I tapped the turntable a few times. It barely moved, stiff from years of neglect. I got a rag from the hall closet and tried to wipe the dust off. The cloth came away gray. A few paint chips flaked off the sides of the device. The wooden casing had cracks that looked like they'd been there forever. After a minute, I realized I was wasting my time. This thing was never going to work without a major overhaul, and I wasn't even sure if I could get the right parts. Still, I decided to try something. I went down to the garage and dug through an old box of cables. I found a cord that might fit the power input, but the connector was different. I went back upstairs and tried plugging it into the broken unit. It didn't fit. I even tried forcing it a little, but no luck. I tossed the cable on a nearby shelf and gave the record player one last look before shutting off the light and going back downstairs. That night, around dinner time, I couldn't stop thinking about my grandparents. They had loved music. My grandfather was especially fond of those old waltzes, but the device had been inoperable for years. I remembered helping him carry it into storage when I was a teenager. The needle arm was broken back then, and he never bothered to fix it. So the idea of it playing on its own felt impossible. I tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing on my meal, plain rice and some leftover chicken. I stared at the TV for a while, but I wasn't paying attention. I kept glancing at the ceiling. It was around 11 when I finally decided to go to bed. I slept restlessly, tossing and turning. At some point, I dreamed of footsteps above me, dragging across the attic floor. Then I woke up to that same faint waltz. I reached for my phone. It read 2:03 a.m. My pulse quickened. I lay there holding my breath, listening to the gentle rhythm. It was so faint I could barely catch it, but it was there. I swung my legs out of bed, feeling that same chill on my feet. I moved toward the hallway, blinking to clear the sleep from my eyes. My stomach clenched and my mouth went dry again. As I approached the attic door, the melody became a bit clearer. It wasn't crisp. It sounded distant, like it was coming through a wall. I paused at the foot of the small stairwell, bracing myself. The door looked normal, just a wooden panel with a simple latch. My hand was trembling when I placed it on the knob. I took a slow breath and opened it. The waltz stopped instantly. I peeked inside. Darkness greeted me, aside from the small glow from the hallway light behind me. The single bulb wasn't on. and I had no intention of fumbling around in the blackness, so I reached for the pull chain. I gave it a yank, and the bulb flickered to life. Everything appeared untouched. The boxes were in the same spots. The record player sat there silent. I stepped in, and the floor creaked. My eyes roamed over the table, the dusty surfaces, the piled-up junk. I tried to listen for anything else, maybe a radio or some device I'd missed, but it was dead quiet. I scanned every corner, moving some old boxes around, looking behind trunks. I found nothing that could produce sound. The tension in my chest made it hard to breathe. My mind raced with questions, but I forced myself to stay focused on what was in front of me. There was no sign of a working speaker, no sign of any intruder. After several minutes, I left, shutting the attic door. I stood in the hallway, feeling a little dizzy. My thoughts spun around, trying to make sense of it. Eventually, I walked back to my bedroom and got under the covers, but I didn't really sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and listened for more sounds. Morning came with its usual routine. I made some coffee, which tasted bitter, and forced down a piece of toast. I felt like I was running on fumes as I got ready for work. Before I headed out, I went to the attic one more time in daylight. Sunlight filtered through a small window, lighting up the dusty air. The record player looked harmless. There was nothing unusual, just old boxes and a musty smell. I wanted to believe I was just tired and hearing things, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. That waltz was too distinct. I sighed, closed the door, and left for the office. All day, my nerves were on edge. I jumped every time my phone buzzed. My coworkers asked if I was okay because I seemed distracted. I just told them I hadn't slept well. In truth, I was dreading another night of that music. My mind kept forming scenarios. Maybe someone was messing with me, or maybe some weird wiring in the house was picking up a random signal. But that wouldn't explain the missing cord or the broken needle. By 5 in the afternoon, I was exhausted. I drove home slowly, feeling tension in my shoulders. As soon as I got inside, I locked the front door and double-checked the back door. Then I went upstairs and examined the attic door again. It looked perfectly normal. No damage, no signs of forced entry. I decided to stay up late and see if the music would start while I was awake. I brewed a pot of coffee around 10 and sipped it in the living room, flipping through channels. By midnight, I felt more anxious than tired. At 1:30, I turned off the TV and just sat in the dark waiting. The silence of the house was unnerving. Around 1:50, I thought I heard something, but it was just a creak in the walls. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., I heard the music. It wasn't loud. It was faint and scratchy, just as before. My pulse kicked into high gear. I stood up and walked down the hallway. My steps sounded too loud on the floorboards. The music continued, that same old waltz, drifting through the ceiling. I reached the attic door. My hand felt sweaty on the knob. I took a breath, then threw the door open. The sound vanished, leaving me with the soft hum of my house's central air. I stepped inside practically on my tiptoes and pulled the chain for the light. The bulb flickered. Nothing moved. The record player was still there, covered in dust, needle broken, no cord. I found myself breathing heavily. My chest felt tight. I walked straight to the device, placed my hand on its lid, and lifted it. The turntable was motionless. Even if it could move, there was no record on it. I let the lid drop shut. I spent another half hour searching the attic for any hidden device or speaker. I checked every corner, rummaged through boxes. I lifted old sheets, opened trunks, and even felt around for wires in the walls. My fingertips grazed dusty beams, cold metal nails, and a few spider webs. Nothing indicated a sound system or anything else that could play music. I kicked a box in frustration. A slight jolt shot up my leg. I stood there for a moment, breathing through clenched teeth, staring at that broken record player. Eventually, I gave up and went back to bed. The next day, I tried calling an old friend who knows a bit about electronics. I explained the situation in plain terms. I keep hearing this old waltz from my attic, but I have a broken record player with no power cord. He chuckled at first, then said maybe there was some kind of radio interference or a hidden battery-powered device. He offered to come over the next weekend with some tools to check the wiring. I felt a small sense of relief at the idea of having someone else verify what was happening. For the next few nights, the pattern continued. Around 2 in the morning, that music would start. Sometimes it lasted a minute, sometimes a bit longer. But the moment I opened the attic door, it stopped. I'd go in, search, come up empty, and go back to bed. My body felt worn out. My eyes had dark circles under them. I started dreading 2 a.m. I would lie in bed, sweaty and anxious, waiting for it. Sure enough, it would begin. Then I'd drag myself to the attic door only to find silence inside. By Friday, my friend showed up. He came in the afternoon carrying a toolbox and a small electronic device that he said could detect signals or electromagnetic fields. We headed up to the attic while it was still bright outside. He plugged in his device, waved it around, and checked the walls. There was a bit of a reading from the old electrical wiring in the house, but nothing that seemed strong enough to produce music. Then he examined the record player itself. He confirmed it was basically junk. The internal components were corroded. The wiring was frayed. The needle arm was beyond repair. There was no hidden power source. He shrugged and said he didn't see how it could produce sound. We went downstairs, and I made us both a quick meal. We decided he'd spend the night so he could see for himself. We watched TV until around 1 a.m., then headed to my bedroom, where we both sat in the dark, listening. I couldn't relax at all. I kept waiting for that faint music. My heart thumped against my ribs. At 1:45, we didn't hear anything. At 2, silence. My friend gave me a concerned look. By 2:30, there was still no sound. We waited until 3 a.m. Nothing happened. Eventually, we both dozed off. In the morning, he looked at me and said he believed me, but there was no sign of it while he was there. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. He left around noon, and I was alone again. I tried to tell myself maybe it was over. Maybe it had just been some freak coincidence. But the very next night, the music returned at 2 a.m., as soft and haunting as before. My skin prickled. I flipped on the bedside lamp, cursing under my breath. I could feel my pulse banging in my temples. I stormed into the hallway, slammed open the attic door, and glared into the darkness. Silence again. I stepped in, flicked on the light, and stared at that old record player. It just sat there. I could see dust swirling in the light above it. I felt my shoulders slump. I wasn't sure what else to do. I considered dragging it down the stairs and tossing it into the trash, but a part of me couldn't bring myself to do that. It belonged to my grandparents, broken or not. I just stood there listening to the quiet. My throat felt dry. My head pounded. After a while, I left the attic and closed the door. I still hear that waltz at 2 in the morning. It never plays at any other time. Every night it starts off faint, just a few notes drifting down. I lie in bed, feeling my muscles tense up, my ears straining. Sometimes it grows a bit louder. Sometimes it stays barely audible. But the moment I open the attic door, it fades. I've stopped searching every corner. I know what I'll find. Nothing. I just stand there, breathing, my mind racing with questions I can't answer. I don't have a neat conclusion. That's what's happening in my house right now. An old, broken record player that shouldn't work is playing a faint waltz at 2 in the morning. There's no power cord, no working needle, and no logical explanation. I've checked the attic a dozen times, and it's always the same scene. Silence and dust. It makes no sense, but I can't ignore it. It keeps happening night after night. I still can't figure out why it only plays at that hour, or why it stops the instant I step inside. I just know it does. I guess I'll keep living with it until I work up the nerve to move the device out of my house. But for now, that's my life. Lying awake in the dark, waiting for the sound of a waltz that has no business playing in my attic. I bought this house 6 months ago. I moved in during early spring. On the first day, I walked through each room to see what needed fixing or cleaning. When I entered the small room in the back where the heater and boiler sit, I noticed the temperature was different. It felt about 10 degrees colder than the rest of the house. I wondered if there was a draft or a crack in the wall. I ran my hand along the walls, but I didn't feel any air slipping through. I looked at the small window near the ceiling. It was shut tightly. I shrugged and thought maybe the heater room just needed more insulation. Over the next few weeks, I got used to the layout of the house. I painted the living room, rearranged furniture in the bedroom, and put boxes of old books in the attic. Everything seemed fine except for that one room. It stayed cold no matter what. The rest of the house could be warm, even stuffy, but the second I walked into that small space, the air felt sharp against my skin. I checked the heater to make sure it was running. I listened for strange noises. I heard a normal hum and a bit of rattling, which the old owner had mentioned as usual. I didn't see any visible leaks or issues. I set the temperature a bit higher just to test. The rest of the house got hotter, but that room stayed chilly. The difference bothered me, but I didn't feel a strong need to fix it right away. It wasn't a major inconvenience. I just used the room for storing a few tools and a folding ladder. In early summer, the nights got warmer. I remember sweating while sleeping, so I turned on the air conditioner in my bedroom. One night around 3 in the morning, I got up to get a glass of water. I noticed the hallway felt stuffy, so I opened a window. That was when I heard a faint noise from the back of the house. It was a low sound, almost like a cough or a clearing of the throat. It stopped quickly, and I stood there holding my glass, waiting to hear it again. Nothing else happened. The house was silent. I walked toward the heater room, opened the door, and flicked on the light. The room felt like it always did. Cold. The heater sat in the corner, the same old clunky machine I'd seen 100 times with some copper pipes running behind it. The faint light from a single bulb made the room look drab. I crouched down to see if anything was behind the heater. Maybe a rodent or something else that had gotten stuck. I didn't see anything. The sound didn't come back. After a minute, I went back to bed. The next day, I checked around outside near the walls of that room. I looked for holes or signs of animals. The foundation looked solid, though. I couldn't find any cracks or openings. I turned up the thermostat inside. The rest of the house got pretty warm. When I went to the heater room, it stayed cold. The air felt heavy and damp, so I installed a small dehumidifier. I plugged it in, set it near the door, and let it run. It collected some water, but that cold sensation never went away. I told a coworker about it during lunch. He laughed and said old houses often have weird pockets of air or insulation issues. He suggested a home inspector. I decided to wait a bit longer. About a week later, I started hearing a similar noise again. It was around the same time, between 2 and 3 in the morning. I'd be in bed, half asleep, and hear a faint sound. It was too soft to identify, but it reminded me of someone clearing their throat. Each time I got up and looked around. I checked the hallway, the bathroom, and the heater room. The light in that room was still working, and I didn't see anything unusual in there. The temperature, as always, was colder than the rest of the house. I didn't smell anything strange. I didn't see any shadows or movement. But the minute I stepped inside, my skin felt prickly. My arms would break out in goosebumps. I would stand still, straining to hear something else. Sometimes I heard the heaters hum. Sometimes just a faint drip of water in the pipes. But no more noises like that cough. I started dreading the nights. I'd lie there, waiting for that faint noise. When I did hear it, my heart sped up. I'd feel a tightness in my chest, and I'd force myself to check the room again. Each time, it was empty. I thought about calling a plumber or a heating specialist. Maybe there was something in the pipes causing that odd sound. Maybe the cold air was caused by a broken seal in the wall. But the idea of explaining a ghostly cough to a professional felt embarrassing. I just kept putting it off. A few weeks later, I decided to make a more thorough inspection. One Saturday afternoon, I put on some old jeans, grabbed a flashlight, and dragged a step stool into the heater room. I looked behind the heater. I got on the stool to check the top of the pipes, shining my flashlight into every corner. I felt the walls for damp spots. I touched the pipes to check for temperature changes. They felt warm except where they ran behind the heater. In that area, the metal was colder. I didn't find any cracks or holes, though. I tried moving the heater a bit, but it was heavy. It barely budged. After a few minutes, I gave up. That same night, I woke up at my usual time, around 3 in the morning. I felt the hair on my arms stand up before I even heard anything. I sat up in bed, trying to focus. The noise came again. It was close to the same cough-like sound, but this time it seemed slightly louder. My mouth went dry. I swung my legs out of bed, took a deep breath, and walked down the hallway. The boards under my feet creaked. My stomach felt tight, and my hands were shaking a bit as I reached for the light switch in the back hallway. I opened the door to the heater room. The cold air hit me like a gust. My heart pounded. I gripped the doorknob and stepped in slowly, shining my phone's flashlight around. I heard another faint noise. It sounded like it came from behind the heater. But the heater is almost flush against the wall. There isn't much space back there. I crouched down, moved my phone's flashlight along the floor, and leaned in. Nothing was there except dust and some small spider webs. I stood up, feeling uneasy. I started to shiver. My breath felt a bit shallow. I listened for a moment. The heater hummed softly. I switched off the light and closed the door. My hands were clammy and I wiped them on my shorts. I walked back to bed and lay there, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts jumped between possible explanations: piping issues, some hidden vent, or maybe air moving through a gap I couldn't see. After about an hour, I finally dozed off. The next day, I called a friend who does general contracting work. I asked him to come over and take a look at the heater room. That Saturday, he arrived with a toolbox. I led him to the small room, and he immediately mentioned how cold it felt. He checked the pipes, the walls, and even the window. He didn't find any major problems. He said I could add insulation and maybe replace the window, but he didn't see anything that would explain a constant chill. He also listened for noises, but it was early afternoon, so it was quiet. He said I should give him a call if it got worse. He didn't seem alarmed, just a bit puzzled. Days passed without any major incidents. I occasionally thought I heard that noise late at night, but it was quieter than before. I started to wonder if maybe I'd just been imagining it, or if it was a minor house quirk I needed to accept. But then, one night in mid-August, something happened that jolted me. I woke up at around 3 in the morning, as usual. I lay there in bed, feeling the urge to listen. The house was silent. I tried to relax and let myself drift back to sleep. Then I heard the faint cough again. My chest tightened immediately. I sat up. It sounded the same, like a weak attempt to clear a throat. This time, though, I heard a soft scrape on the floor. I felt sweat form on my forehead. My legs felt shaky when I got out of bed. I walked slowly toward the heater room. The hallway felt warm. When I opened the door, the cold air washed over me. It almost felt like stepping into a fridge. My nostrils flared. I flipped on the light, and for a moment I thought I saw movement near the corner by the pipes. Just a quick flicker of motion. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my neck. I aimed my phone flashlight there. I saw nothing. I stayed still for about a minute. My legs twitched and I noticed my breathing sounded ragged. The room was dead quiet aside from the heater's low hum. I forced myself to walk over to the corner. I ran my hand along the pipes. They were cold to the touch. I knelt down to see if there was anything on the floor. I saw a small scratch on the wood. It looked fresh. I hadn't noticed it before. I touched it and felt a slight groove. Something had scraped the surface. I stood up, feeling anxious. I left the room and shut the door behind me, then locked it from the outside. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, watching TV with the volume low. I couldn't relax. My body felt tense and I kept glancing at the hallway. Eventually, the sun came up. I waited until about 10 in the morning to unlock the door. The air inside felt the same, cold. The scratch on the floor was still there. The pipes looked the same. I ran my hand along them again. No change. I checked behind the heater. Nothing. I had a weird knot in my stomach, but I didn't know what else to do. At that point, I decided to call a different specialist. I explained that my heater room was cold all the time, and that I heard unusual noises. The guy sounded polite, but probably thought I was overreacting. He came over 2 days later. He examined the heater, the vents, and the exhaust pipes. He even checked for carbon monoxide leaks. Everything came back normal. He did suggest that maybe the vent system was partially blocked, but he wasn't sure that would cause a nightly cough-like sound. He recommended cleaning out the ducts and adding a better seal around the door. I agreed to let him do the duct cleaning. A few days later, he returned with equipment to vacuum and clear the ducts. After he finished, he said they weren't too dirty. He looked a bit puzzled that it was still cold in there. He shrugged and said maybe the room had poor insulation or something else beyond his scope. I tried to distract myself by focusing on other parts of the house. I repainted my bedroom. I swapped out some light fixtures in the kitchen. I stayed up late watching TV in the living room instead of going to bed early. But every night, around the same hour, I felt on edge, wondering if I'd hear that noise. Most nights I did. Sometimes it was faint, sometimes a bit louder. It always came from the same spot. I kept the door locked sometimes, hoping I could ignore it, but I usually ended up opening it and checking anyway. One night, I felt fed up. I decided I was going to spend an hour in that room just sitting, waiting, and listening. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen, a flashlight, and a heavy sweatshirt. I set the chair in the corner across from the heater, right by the door, facing the heater. I turned off all the lights in the house except the overhead light in the heater room. Then I sat down. The cold air made my skin tingle. After about 15 minutes, I started to shiver, even with the sweatshirt on. The heater let out its usual hum. I watched the time on my phone. Around 2:30 in the morning, I heard the first faint cough. My stomach clenched. I focused on the area behind the heater. That's where it seemed to come from. I gripped the edges of the chair and forced myself to stay seated. A minute passed. Then I heard the noise again. A soft cough or throat clear. I felt my heart racing, and my neck started to sweat even though the air was cold. I stood up carrying my flashlight and walked toward the heater. My mouth felt dry. I crouched down and tried to look behind it. There was a small gap, just a few inches. I saw darkness. The cough sounded again, but this time it almost echoed from below. I jumped up, backed away, and nearly tripped over my chair. My legs shook and I felt a surge of adrenaline. I aimed the flashlight around, trying to see if there was some hidden panel or small opening in the floor. I didn't see anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there just out of sight. I didn't last the full hour. After about 20 more minutes, I couldn't take it. The repeated coughs made my nerves stand on end. I left the room, shut the door, and locked it again. My heart was pounding and my chest felt tight. I went back to the living room, sat on the couch, and stared at the wall. I ended up sleeping there, fitfully, until morning. It's been a month since that night. I still hear that noise every few nights. Sometimes I ignore it. Sometimes I check, but I never see anything. The scratch on the floor is still there, and I noticed another one a few inches away. I haven't told many people because I don't want them thinking I'm imagining things. I haven't seen any signs of rats or other pests. Nothing is missing from the room, and I don't see footprints or anything else that would confirm an intruder. It's just that noise and that persistent cold. I plan to seal the entire room, check every pipe, maybe even replace the heater altogether if I have to. I'm trying to keep my nerves under control. I still get a jolt of fear when I hear the cough around 3 in the morning. I tense up and feel sweat on my palms. I wish I could explain it logically. Right now I can't. There's just that cold room and that sound I can't trace. I'm sure I'll find a practical reason eventually. Until then, I keep the door locked at night and leave a light on in the hallway. I try not to let my imagination run wild. It's my house, and I'm going to stay here. But every time I walk by that small room, the chill crawls up my back, and I can't help glancing at the door, wondering if I'll hear that quiet throat clear again. I first noticed the strange movement behind my reflection at around 2 in the morning. I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water when I saw something shift in the mirror. It was a quick, silent movement, like a person sliding out of view. I remember stopping in my tracks, feeling my pulse in my neck and staring into the mirror. The hallway behind me looked the same as always. Same walls, same coat rack, same low light from the living room lamp. But I was sure I had seen something else in there with me. After a few seconds, I told myself it was just my imagination. I turned around to check behind me, and nothing was there. Still, I couldn't shake that feeling of being watched. I bought that mirror at a garage sale about a week earlier. It was around 5 feet tall and 2 feet wide, with a dark wooden frame that looked a bit worn around the edges. The seller was a middle-aged woman who said she'd inherited it from her aunt. I didn't ask many questions. I just liked how it looked, old but solid. The price was good, so I strapped it to the top of my car and brought it home. I put it in my entry hallway because that was the only space tall enough to hang it properly. The first few days, I didn't notice anything odd about it. It was just another piece of furniture, something I glanced at on my way in or out of the house. Then came that first strange night. After it happened, I stayed awake until morning, checking the hallway every so often. At first, I switched the lights on, but that made it impossible to see the reflection clearly because of the glare. So I switched the lights off, letting the dim light from the living room lamp spill into the hallway. Around 3 in the morning, I passed by again and saw nothing unusual. By 4, I was so tired my eyes were burning, so I went to bed. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The next day, I went to work feeling drained. My concentration was off. I kept thinking about that quick movement behind the mirror. I pictured a shape or a figure, but it was impossible to recall any details. It was more like a shadow that shouldn't be there. That night, I made up my mind to observe the mirror more carefully. I waited until midnight, turned off most of the lights, and sat on a chair in the living room with a clear view of the hallway. The mirror was visible, though a little dark. I sat there for about an hour. My eyes grew heavy, and I felt myself drift in and out of consciousness. I decided to give up for the night and head to bed. At around 2 in the morning, though, I woke up. I'm not sure what stirred me. Maybe a noise, maybe a slight change in the air. I felt that uneasy sensation again, like something was in the hallway. My heart started pounding and my skin felt clammy. I walked out of my bedroom, stood at the edge of the hallway, and looked into the mirror. At first, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Then, as I leaned forward, I saw a quick flicker of movement behind my own reflection. It looked like a shape passing from one side of the hallway to the other. The thing is, my hallway is small. There's no space for anyone to move around me without me noticing. It felt impossible. I turned around immediately, flicked on the hallway light, and stood there, breathing hard. Nothing was there. I felt my stomach tighten. The hair on my arms was raised. I switched off the light and checked the mirror again, but now I couldn't see anything except myself and the faint outline of the walls. I went back to bed and lay there, my mind racing. I felt my heart beating in my ears. I wondered if I should get rid of the mirror, but I also felt a stubborn curiosity. I wanted to know what was causing these reflections. I thought about the angles of the hallway lights, the possibility of a reflection from outside, maybe from a passing car. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I live in a quiet neighborhood with little traffic at night, and my windows in the front of the house were closed. There was no reason for any strange lights or shadows. The next night, I tried a different approach. I took my phone and set it on video mode. I propped it on a small table across from the mirror, aiming it straight at the reflection. Then I turned off the lights, leaving just the glow from the living room lamp. I went about my evening routine, making dinner and watching TV. Around 1 in the morning, I felt that same chill. My skin prickled. I got up from the couch and walked to the hallway, my phone still recording. I stood in front of the mirror, but nothing happened right away. I stared at myself, feeling my breathing grow shallow. Then I noticed a slight shift behind my reflection. It happened so fast that I almost doubted it. My heart thumped, and I turned around again. No one was there. I turned back, and it was gone. I rushed to my phone and stopped the recording. I played it back, squinting at the screen. Most of the time, it was just me standing there looking nervous. But at about the 30-second mark, there was a faint blur behind my reflected image. It was too quick to see clearly, but I could tell it was some sort of movement in the background. I paused and rewound it several times, but it didn't become any clearer. Still, it was enough to confirm that I wasn't imagining it. Something was in the mirror besides me. I felt cold sweat on my forehead. My hands shook as I held the phone. I didn't want to spend the night in the same house with that mirror, but I also couldn't bring myself to throw it out. Part of me wanted to figure this out. I walked back to the mirror and touched the frame. The wood felt normal, a bit rough, maybe slightly cooler than room temperature. The glass itself looked fine. No scratches or distortions. I tried pressing my hand on the glass. It felt solid. I tapped it. It made a dull sound. I sighed and shook my head. I thought about covering it with a sheet, but I worried that would only make me more nervous. So I left it uncovered and went to bed, though I slept with the lights on in the bedroom. Over the next few days, things got more intense. I started seeing the movement almost every night, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning. Sometimes it was a flicker. Other times I thought I saw the outline of a person stepping out of view. I tried turning the hallway lights on and off, checking from different angles. Nothing helped. Whenever I turned around, the hallway was empty. I began to dread those late-night trips to the bathroom or the kitchen. My palms would sweat, and my heart would race before I even left my bedroom. One time I decided to approach the mirror very slowly. It was about 2:30 in the morning, and I was heading to the kitchen for some water. I noticed the movement in the mirror again. Instead of turning around right away, I crept closer. I wanted to see if the reflection would become clearer. As I got within a foot of the glass, I heard a faint sound. It was like a soft scraping noise, as if someone was sliding something against the wall on the other side. I froze. My mouth went dry. My heart was pounding. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and shallow. I kept looking, but I couldn't see any detail. I just saw a dark shape slide to the side and vanish. When I finally turned around, there was no sound and no one in the corridor. I thought about calling a friend or a neighbor, but it sounded crazy to say, "I think my mirror is showing me something that isn't there." Most people would tell me it's a trick of the light or that I'm hallucinating from lack of sleep. And I couldn't prove anything beyond that blurry movement I caught on video. I was also afraid they would see nothing if they looked at it. Or worse, that they'd see it too and we'd both have no explanation. After about a week of this, I reached my breaking point. I was losing sleep, and I felt on edge all the time. My back felt tense, and I had a constant knot in my stomach. I had nightmares about walking in front of the mirror and seeing a hand reach out and grab me. Even though it never actually happened, my imagination kept going there. So I decided I was going to move the mirror out of my hallway. I didn't care if it left a big empty space on the wall. I just wanted some peace. I waited until midday on a Saturday, when the sun was bright and everything felt safer. I grabbed some tools and went to the hallway. I unhooked the mirror from the nails on the wall. It was heavy, and I had to strain my arms a bit. As I lifted it, the mirror tilted forward, and I saw my reflection in a weird angle. My hair stood on end because for a split second I thought I saw something else behind me in that tilt, like a figure crouched near the floor. But when I turned around, there was nothing. My heart was racing, and I almost dropped the mirror. I held it tighter and carried it to a small storage room next to the garage. I leaned the mirror against a corner of the storage room, facing the wall. Then I left and closed the door. For the next few nights, I slept better. I felt relieved not seeing that mirror every time I went through the hallway. The tension in my shoulders eased and I started feeling like myself again. I was still cautious at night, but nothing strange happened in the hallway. I would get water or use the bathroom without feeling that creepy sensation. But about 3 days after I moved the mirror, I started hearing noises from the storage room. I'd be in the living room, and I'd hear a soft scrape, like wood sliding against concrete. The first time I heard it, I thought maybe I had a mouse problem or something else. But then it happened again late at night. I heard a low thud, followed by that same scraping noise. I felt my chest tighten. I walked to the storage room, opened the door, and flicked on the light. The mirror was still there, facing the wall. Nothing else looked disturbed. The boxes and shelves around it were in the same place. I checked the floor for rodent droppings or signs of an animal. I found nothing. I decided to rotate the mirror so it faced sideways, resting on its frame against the wall, thinking maybe it was shifting on its own. I made sure it was secure. Then I left the storage room and closed the door again. But the noises continued over the next few nights. Some nights I'd hear a gentle scraping. Other nights it sounded like a light knock from inside the storage room. Each time I'd check and find the mirror in the same position. It never moved an inch. One night, around 2 in the morning, I got fed up with the noises and decided to do something drastic. I put on my shoes and jacket, grabbed the mirror, and took it out to the backyard. My plan was to leave it outside near the trash bins. My heart was racing as I carried it, worried I might trip or drop it. The night was quiet, and the air felt cold on my skin. When I reached the trash bins, I set the mirror down and turned it, so the glass faced the fence. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath. Then I walked back into the house. I locked the door, checked the windows, and went to bed. That was the first decent night of sleep I'd had in weeks. I heard no noises, saw no movement, and felt no strange chills. In the morning, I went out to check on the mirror. I half expected it to be gone or broken, but it was still there, leaning against the fence. The glass looked intact. The frame was the same. I stared at it for a second. Then I turned around and walked back inside, telling myself I'd call someone to haul it away or take it to a junkyard. For a few days, I just left it there. The weather was clear, so I wasn't worried about rain. I went about my life and tried not to think about it too much. At night, I still felt a bit uneasy, like I was waiting for another disturbance. But nothing happened. The house felt calm again. I started sleeping with the lights off, and I didn't wake up with that sense of dread. On the third day, a junk removal service came by. I pointed them to the backyard and said, "Take the mirror. I don't want it." They didn't ask many questions. They hauled it away in their truck. I watched them drive off, feeling a weight lift off my chest. I went back inside, looked at the empty space on my hallway wall, and felt relieved. I didn't care about the emptiness. I just wanted peace. That was a month ago. I haven't seen anything strange since. No movements in the hallway, no noises from the storage room. I'm still jumpy around mirrors, though. When I go to my bathroom or pass by the mirrored doors on my closet, I feel my stomach clench for a second, but then I remind myself it's just a normal reflection. Whatever was going on with that old mirror is gone now. I don't have a neat explanation, and I don't really want one anymore. I just want to feel safe in my own home again. So far I do, and I'm never buying a mirror from a garage sale again. I started my shift at 6 in the morning like always. When I walked past the security desk, the guard said, "Hey, you going back to that floor again?" I nodded, feeling a tightness in my chest. I felt anxious, but I tried to hide it. I said, "Yeah, I have to check the lights one more time. They're on again." I've been the head maintenance guy at this hospital for almost 15 years. I handle everything from broken pipes to flickering lights. But this situation is different. There's an entire floor that's been shut down for decades. We're talking about old hallways, dusty rooms, and a sign on the door that says, "Restricted, authorized personnel only." According to the files, the hospital decided to cut power to that entire level a long time ago. They removed most of the wiring, sealed off the walls, and shut down the main breaker for that floor. The official story is that we don't use it because the structural integrity isn't reliable, and we can't afford a full renovation. The weird thing is that every morning I find certain lights on in that corridor. At first I thought maybe an electrician reconnected something, or maybe there was a stray circuit that didn't get cut. But I checked everything in the sub-basement. The breaker for that floor is switched off, and the panel is locked. No one has touched it in years. No one's replaced any bulbs or tested any fixtures up there. The place should be completely dark. Yet, I keep seeing those fluorescent overheads glowing like it's a normal, active hallway. The first time I noticed it was about 2 months ago. I was running a routine check for the AC system. Some of the ducts run through the old floor, so I have to pass by the locked doors occasionally. Usually it's pitch black. There's no reason to look in. But that morning, I saw a faint light around the edge of the door. I thought, that's impossible, but I still opened the door. I remember standing there, staring down a dimly lit corridor. The overhead lights were flickering a bit. They have that buzzing sound, the kind that fluorescent tubes make when they're old. My ears started to ring a little. I felt my pulse speed up. I wiped my forehead because I felt a cold sweat forming. I tried to think logically. Maybe someone turned on an emergency generator up here by accident, but we don't have a generator for this floor, and the breaker is off. I walked forward, checking each door. Some of the rooms had the lights on, some were dark. I flipped switches on the walls, but they didn't do anything. After a few minutes, I heard a faint scraping noise, like someone was dragging something along the floor. I froze. My chest got tight, and I started breathing faster. I called out, "Hello?" No one answered. I tried to act calm. Then I heard a clank, like metal tapping on metal. I decided to leave. I backed away, closed the door behind me, and felt this pressure in my ears. I stood in the hallway outside for a minute, trying to steady my breathing. The next day I came in earlier. I wanted to see if it happened again. I went straight to that locked door. This time the lights were on in the corridor, just like before. I opened the door and stepped inside. The air smelled stale, with a hint of something musty like old furniture or damp walls. My nose wrinkled, the lights still buzzed, and one of them flickered near the end of the hall. I tried to find the source of the power, but the wiring had been removed. I opened a few panels, but everything was disconnected. The cables were cut. There was no possible route for electricity, yet the lights stayed on. I reported it to my boss. He shrugged and said, "That floor is off limits. We only worry about the active floors." I pushed a little, saying this might be a risk. He told me to put a lock on the access door and forget about it unless we got an official request to investigate further. He didn't seem interested in a deeper look. So I locked the door with a thick padlock and left it for the day. But that didn't fix the problem. The next morning I saw the same glow under the door. The padlock was still in place, unbroken. I jiggled it, thinking maybe someone had picked the lock, but it looked fine. I found the key in my toolbox, so no one else could have opened it. I unlocked it and peeked inside. The lights were on again. My stomach churned and my palms got clammy. It felt wrong. I felt sure I wasn't supposed to be there. But I still walked in. I decided to explore every room that had light shining through. There were about 6 patient rooms on each side of the corridor, plus a few supply closets and a nurse's station at the end. The nurse's station was dimly lit. The overhead fixture was flickering and making that same electric hum. I saw old desks, overturned chairs, and some broken cabinets. I checked inside the desks, expecting to see dusty files or something. There were just empty drawers. I touched the top of the desk, and dust clung to my fingers. It was thick, which means no one had used that station in a long time. In one of the patient rooms, I saw an old bed frame with no mattress. The walls were yellowed. The curtains were gone. I shined my flashlight into the corners, just to make sure there wasn't someone hiding. I don't know why I expected anyone, but I felt uneasy. I walked up to the light fixture on the ceiling. It was just a standard hospital fluorescent box. I reached up to touch the cover, and it felt slightly warm. That shouldn't happen if the circuit was truly dead. It also shouldn't happen if the bulbs were decades old. But they were glowing bright. I felt the heat and smelled the dust burning off. I moved on to the next rooms. Some were dark. Some had faint light coming from overhead tubes. No two rooms looked exactly the same. Some had more dust, some less. Some had old equipment piled in corners. Others were almost empty. In one room, I saw an IV stand leaning against the wall. I tried to move it, but one of the wheels was jammed. It made a loud screech as I dragged it aside. My heart skipped a beat at the noise. I felt paranoid, like I was going to attract attention. But there was no one else around. I started hearing small noises again, like the building was settling or maybe pipes were expanding. It sounded like footsteps at times, a faint tapping that made me turn my head. Whenever I stood still, the tapping stopped. When I walked, it started again. My head felt light and my mouth got dry. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I told myself that old buildings make noise, especially ones with neglected ductwork and cracked walls. But I couldn't shake that sense of being watched. It felt like eyes were on me, but I never saw anyone. Every time I left that floor, I made sure to switch off every light fixture I could find. Most didn't have functioning switches, but I tried anyway. Then I'd go back to the main breaker panel in the sub-basement and confirm it was still off for that entire floor. It was. The next day, the lights were on again, just like before. I tried taking photos with my phone, but they always came out grainy and dark. Even if I saw the lights glowing, the picture didn't capture the brightness. It was frustrating. I showed them to the guard at the front desk and he shrugged. He said it looked like a dark hallway to him. I knew no one was going to believe how bright those lights were in person, but I kept a record. I have a folder on my phone with at least 20 attempts at pictures. None of them prove anything. After a couple of weeks, I started hearing more stories from the night staff. Some nurses said they heard faint humming noises on the sealed floor. Others said they saw movement behind the windows of the locked doors. An orderly told me he once saw a shadow there, but he refused to investigate. None of them wanted to go up with me when I asked for help. They just said, "No thanks, not going up there." I didn't blame them. My boss eventually gave me permission to do a full inspection of the old wiring system, as long as it didn't interfere with my regular tasks. I spent my lunch break studying old electrical blueprints in the archives. Everything confirmed that the 7th floor was disconnected from the main supply. There was a note from some old project manager stating, "All circuits leading to floor 7 have been removed. No power is available at this time." That line repeated in different reports dated years apart, so I went up to physically trace any leftover cables. I opened the walls in the maintenance closets. I looked in the crawl spaces. All of it ended in dead stubs. They never connected to anything. I even checked the rooftop, wondering if there was a solar panel or some hidden source feeding the corridor. Nothing. The hospital's official system doesn't recognize the 7th floor at all. It might as well not exist in modern records, aside from the structural layout. Last week I got fed up. I decided to stay late after my shift and see if something happened at night. I brought a flashlight, a portable radio, and a thermos of coffee. Around midnight, I used my key to get onto the 7th floor. It was dark at first. The lights were off, no glow around the edges of the doors. I stood there in the quiet, hearing my own breathing. The smell of dust was strong. I walked slowly down the hallway, shining my flashlight on the walls. Everything looked the same as before, just darker. The floors creaked under my boots. I made it to the nurse's station. No lights, no weird hum. I sat on a chair that felt wobbly. I started sipping my coffee, feeling a slight chill in the air. My arms had goosebumps. Then, around 1 in the morning, the lights flickered on. It happened in a split second. 1 second I was sitting there in darkness. The next second, the overhead fixtures glowed and buzzed. I jumped out of the chair. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I walked into the hallway and looked at the overhead lights, flickering in random patterns. At first I thought maybe we had a power surge from the main building, but the official breakers were still off. I checked my radio to see if it worked. It was full of static. I tried to contact the guard on the main floor, I just got hissing noise. When I released the talk button, I heard faint popping sounds like the radio was picking up interference. Then there was a soft clang down the hallway, like metal against metal. It reminded me of that first time I came up here. I forced myself to walk toward the sound. I moved slowly, flashlight pointed ahead, even though the corridor was lit. My shoes squeaked on the old floor. I passed by a few open doors. I kept glancing inside, hoping to see something that explained the noise. Each room was empty except for old furniture. My chest felt tight, and my shoulders were tense. I could hear my pulse in my ears. Then I heard another clang, followed by a scrape. It was coming from a supply closet at the end of the hallway. The door was cracked open and a pale fluorescent light shone out. I approached it, feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My mouth was dry, and I could smell my own sweat. I reached out and pushed the door open wider. Inside, I saw an old metal cart with one wheel missing. It was leaning to the side. Nothing else looked out of place. I stared at it, trying to figure out where the noise could have come from. Then I saw the cart shift an inch on its own. The handle scraped against the wall, making that same clang. I stepped back, almost tripping over my own feet. My stomach knotted. I felt like I was going to be sick. The overhead light in the closet flickered, then turned off by itself. The cart stopped moving. The hallway lights were still on. I stood there, frozen, for a good 10 seconds, just listening. My breath was shallow. I finally turned around and walked as fast as I could back to the stairwell. I didn't run, but I was close to it. I made sure the door was locked behind me, and I practically bolted down the stairs to the 6th floor. I told the guard in the lobby what happened. He looked at me with wide eyes but said nothing. I clocked out and went home, shaking. The next morning I returned early. The lights were on again, shining under the door. I unlocked it, did a quick walk through, and everything looked the same as usual. The cart was in the closet. The nurse's station was empty. The air was still stale. I shut off any switches that would respond, then left. All day I couldn't focus on my regular tasks. I kept thinking about that cart moving on its own. I kept replaying the sound in my head. Now, every morning, I go up there. I turn off the lights, see that everything's locked down, and head back to my duties. But I know I'll find them on again the following day. I've talked to a few people about it, but no one wants to dig into it. They say it's not hurting anyone. They say we don't have the budget to renovate or investigate. I can't argue with them. It's just me against an entire abandoned floor. I keep telling myself there must be a logical explanation. Maybe there's leftover wiring we can't see. Or maybe the fixtures are powered by some hidden circuit that nobody ever documented. But then I think about that cart shifting on its own, or the times I've heard footsteps when I'm the only person up there. I can't explain that. So I do my job. I show up, I lock the door, and I tell my boss that everything's fine. But I know tomorrow morning I'll come in and see that glow under the door again. And I know I'll have to step inside, see those lights buzzing overhead, and wonder what's really going on in that dusty corridor. I'm not sure I want to find the answer. All I know is that something keeps lighting up that floor and I can't turn it off no matter how hard I try. I got the house from my uncle a few months ago. He passed it on to me when he left town without much explanation. I never asked him why, and he never told me. Now it's my place. It sits on the edge of a still lake that barely ripples, even on windy days. There's a small pier that stretches out about 10 feet over the water. The wood is old, with dark stains and chipped boards. I can't see any fish in the water, and I hardly ever see any movement across the surface. Everything looks calm in the daytime. It's a different story at sundown. When I first arrived, I unloaded my boxes into the living room. The house smelled like stale air and damp carpet. I opened all the windows to let in a breeze. I didn't notice anything strange at first. I just felt a little uneasy, maybe because I was alone in a house that held so many of my uncle's things. The furniture had a layer of dust on it, and the rugs looked worn. I heard the boards creak under my feet. I saw a few old pictures on the walls, mostly of him standing by the lake with a fishing rod. The place felt stuck in time. I decided to walk out onto the pier right away. I wanted to see the view. I remember the sun was going down, and the sky had that orange glow. The water looked flat, almost like a sheet of tinted glass. I stood there, hands in my pockets, and took a breath. I felt a light breeze from the lake, which surprised me because it was still pretty hot outside. That breeze felt cold, like air-conditioned air coming out of a vent. Right then I heard something, a single syllable that sounded like my name. It came from across the lake, where there's just a row of tall, thin trees and a narrow patch of rocks. I froze for a second. My mouth felt dry and the hair on my arms stood up. I looked around and didn't see anyone. I strained my ears, but all I caught was the soft lap of water against the shore. The air kept that chill, like a small cloud had drifted in front of the sun. I glanced over my shoulder, back at the house, but the windows were empty. Nothing moved inside. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe some echo. I went back inside and tried not to think about it. For the rest of that evening, I unpacked some kitchen items, placed them in the cupboards, and stacked a few plates next to the sink. My feet shuffled across the linoleum floor, and the only sounds I heard were my own movements. I flipped on an old radio I found in a cabinet, but the reception was poor. It crackled a bit. Around 10 at night, I decided to call it a day. I tried to sleep in the main bedroom. The mattress was firm and the sheets smelled of mothballs, so I used my own sleeping bag on top of it. I turned off the light and lay there in the dark, listening to the hum of crickets outside the window. Now and then I thought I heard something else, but I couldn't be sure. It was a faint noise, like a whisper that didn't form any words. The next morning I woke up early. I wanted to check the house more thoroughly. I opened every closet, looked under the beds, and rummaged through the attic. The attic was cramped, and there was only one small window letting in a narrow beam of light. I saw a few boxes labeled with my uncle's name. Inside them, there were old newspapers and some fishing tackle. I found a tackle box full of rusted hooks, plastic lures, and a spool of fishing line. The line looked brittle, like it would snap if I tried to use it. I didn't find any diaries or anything like that. It was all random junk. I spent most of the day cleaning. I dusted the old furniture, swept the floors, and wiped down the countertops. My uncle's scent still lingered in the place, a mix of aftershave and pipe tobacco. In the afternoon, I sat in a worn armchair and ate a quick sandwich. I stared through the screen door at the pier, thinking about what I heard the night before. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a bird, or maybe even a neighbor's voice that carried over the water. That evening, I walked outside again around the same time, just to see if it would happen again. The sun sat low on the horizon, turning the sky that hazy blend of purple and red. I stepped onto the pier, feeling the old boards creak under my boots. I gazed across the water. I felt the same cold breeze on my face, and it gave me chills. Then I heard it again. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. It was my name, spoken in that familiar tone my uncle used when he wanted my attention. It sounded like it came from the far bank, where the trees swayed gently. My heart hammered in my chest. I felt sweat break out on my forehead, but at the same time the breeze was still cold. I glanced around, trying to spot someone or something moving among the shadows on the other side of the lake. I saw nothing. The voice didn't repeat. My arms felt shaky. I took a step back, then another. I almost tripped on a loose board near the end of the pier. I caught my balance and hurried back toward the house. Before I went inside, I looked over my shoulder. The lake was calm. The trees on the far shore were dark outlines against the fading light. The air felt normal again, the chill gone. I shut the door behind me and turned every lock I could find. That night, I didn't sleep much. I tossed and turned, my mind stuck on that voice. I knew it was real because I heard it twice. I also felt that same sudden drop in temperature. My uncle used to say the lake had secrets, but he never explained what that meant. I got up around midnight, made some coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. I kept the lights on, feeling a bit on edge. I could hear the clock ticking in the living room. I checked the window now and then, but the outside was too dark to see. I gave up on sleeping and stayed awake until the sun started to rise. Over the next few days, I noticed strange little things around the property. Sometimes the back door felt cold to the touch, even though the sun was shining directly on it. Sometimes the air in the living room felt heavy, like the pressure changed for a moment. I also found wet footprints on the front porch one morning, as if someone with damp shoes had walked across it. They led right up to the door, but then stopped. I couldn't figure out how that made sense because I hadn't gone out yet and I didn't see anyone else on the property. The footprints dried out and vanished before I could think to take a picture. One afternoon, I decided to check the small shed behind the house. My uncle's old boat was in there, a simple aluminum rowboat with a pair of oars. The boat looked weathered, with some dents on the sides. The oars were leaning against the wall. I noticed the seat cushions were missing and the boat smelled like mildew. I wondered if I should try taking it out onto the lake, but something in me held back. I wasn't sure I wanted to be out there, especially if that voice showed up again. I felt a jolt in my stomach just thinking about it. Every evening around sunset, I felt drawn to the pier. It was almost like a routine I couldn't avoid. Part of me was scared to go, but another part of me needed to see if it would happen again. Sometimes I only felt the breeze without the voice. Other times I heard a faint whisper that might have been my name. It always made the back of my neck tingle. My breath would catch in my throat, and I'd wait, muscles tensed, expecting something else. Most of the time, nothing else happened. I'd stand there for a few minutes, scanning the shoreline, then head back inside. About a week later, I tried a different approach. I decided to walk around the lake during the day. There's a narrow dirt path that circles most of the shoreline, though it's overgrown in places. I put on some heavy boots and set off. As I walked, I pushed through weeds and tall grass. I passed a cluster of birch trees and a rocky patch near the water's edge. I didn't see any houses or cabins on that side. I saw a few fallen logs and some bird nests in the trees, but no signs of people. The air felt still and I could hear my own footsteps crunching on twigs. After a while, I reached the spot directly across from my uncle's house. I could see the pier in the distance. I stood there, resting my hands on my hips, trying to picture how the voice would carry across the water. Everything was quiet. There was no chill in the air. I noticed a few small rocks near the shore, but that was it. After a few minutes, I walked back. That evening, I sat on the pier again. The breeze rolled in and my arms broke out in goosebumps. I heard it again. This time it was louder and clearer. My name echoed across the water, and I felt my stomach drop. My legs tensed like I was ready to sprint away, but instead I called out, "Hello?" I waited, my voice echoing back, but there was nothing else. Then I tried again, a little louder. "Who's out there?" The response was just a faint echo of my own words. No direct reply. My heart pounded against my ribs and my palms felt clammy. I wiped them on my jeans and stood there a minute longer. The cold breeze faded away, and the air returned to its normal temperature. I walked back to the house, my mind buzzing with questions. A few days went by like that. I kept hearing the voice at sunset, always followed by a brief chill. Every time it happened, I got that same clenching feeling in my gut. My mouth went dry, and I'd stand there looking like an idiot staring at the far shoreline. I wanted to figure out what was going on. I started searching through the house for any clue that might explain it. I checked behind furniture, dug through every drawer, and looked under every loose floorboard. I found old receipts, postcards, a few fishing magazines, and some scribbled notes, but nothing that explained the voice. One night, I sat in the living room with all the lights on. I had the windows open to get some fresh air. I could see the outline of the pier under the moonlight. I felt restless. My shoulders were tense, and my eyes kept drifting to the windows. Finally, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. I walked to the shore, next to the pier, and shone the flashlight across the water. The beam was weak, and it barely cut through the darkness on the other side. I felt the breeze again, that icy rush of air that made me shiver. My arm hair stood straight up. Then I heard my uncle's voice just once, calling my name. My heart pounded, and I yelled out, "What do you want?" I waited, panting a little, but there was only silence. I turned off the flashlight and stood there, breathing hard. My mind raced. I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was his voice. Even if I couldn't see him, I knew that tone. It wasn't wind or some trick. Something was going on. I thought about everything my uncle left behind. He never told me why he wanted me to have this place. He never explained why he left so quickly. He just said it was time for him to move on, and he handed over the deed. Now, I wondered if he regretted something. Maybe he wanted to share some information about the lake or the house. I remembered how he used to mention that the water held secrets, but he never gave details, and I never asked. I spent the rest of that night pacing around the living room and kitchen. My skin felt clammy. My hands trembled whenever I thought about that voice. I felt a knot in my chest. I wasn't sure if I was scared or just frustrated that I couldn't find an answer. By dawn, I was exhausted. I sat on the couch, leaning my head back against the cushion, and closed my eyes for a while. I drifted in and out of a light sleep, jolting awake every time I thought I heard a noise outside. Over the next week, I tried to keep a routine. I cleaned, I checked the property, and I walked into town for groceries once. I talked to a neighbor who lived a mile down the road. He told me he didn't know much about my uncle's place. He said my uncle mostly kept to himself. The neighbor mentioned that the lake always felt too cold for him, even on hot summer days. He shrugged it off as a natural quirk. I didn't bring up the voice. I felt foolish mentioning that out loud. Each sunset, I stood on the pier. I braced myself for the voice, the chill, the sudden tension in my body. Sometimes I heard it, sometimes I didn't. When it happened, my lungs seemed to tighten. My eyes would dart across the lake, searching for a shape or a silhouette. I never saw anything. The house behind me stayed silent, and the trees on the far shore swayed quietly. The call always ended with that rush of cold air fading away. I still don't know what my uncle wants from me, if that's even what this is. Maybe he's trying to pass on some message. Maybe it's just something the lake does, using his voice in some weird echo. I haven't figured it out yet, and I'm not sure I will. I just know I feel compelled to sit out there every night waiting and listening. My heart races each time, and my skin prickles with anticipation. I catch myself holding my breath, hoping for a clue or a sign. But it never goes beyond that single call. I'm still here, and I'm not leaving. The house is mine. I intend to stay until I get an answer, or until the voice stops. If my uncle needs me to know something, I'm ready to learn. If there's nothing else behind it, then I guess I'll just live with the confusion. Right now, all I can do is wait on that pier at dusk, feel that sudden cold air, and hear his familiar tone come across the water. It's unsettling, but it keeps happening. So I stay. Maybe tomorrow night will bring something new. Maybe not. Either way, I'll be there, listening, heart pounding, eyes on that far shore, ready for whatever comes next. I wake up to a sharp tapping sound against the glass door next to my bedroom. It's past midnight, and everything in my house is dark and still. My heart races right away because I know I'm not imagining it. I've been hearing these faint knocks for 2 nights in a row, and they never last long. The moment I switch on the outside light, the tapping stops. Every time I check my security cameras, I see nothing. Just a black screen, no movement, no signs of an intruder. It feels wrong that I can't spot anyone. I'm not used to feeling defenseless in my own home, but something about this situation makes me uneasy. I live alone in a small, single-story house. The bedroom is at the end of a short hallway with a sliding glass door that leads to the side yard. My yard's not big, but it's enough space for a small patio and a walkway. I have lights outside that I installed a year ago for safety, plus a few cameras mounted near the roof. They feed into a system that records 24/7. If there's motion, I get an alert on my phone. But for the past 2 nights, every time I hear the knocks, the motion alerts never come. When I open my app, the cameras show no changes, no shapes, and no movement. Tonight is the third night. I'm sitting in bed, reading stuff on my phone. I've got the curtains shut, but the quiet outside feels different than usual. My skin prickles from the tension. The air in my room feels thick, like there's not enough oxygen. My eyes keep darting to the door, waiting for some sign that I'm not alone. I don't want to turn off the lights yet. A part of me wants to pretend there's nothing out there, but I also know I won't be able to sleep unless I figure out what's happening. The first tap starts just after 1 a.m. It's soft, like a fingertip or maybe a small object lightly hitting the glass. I freeze, my arms tense, and my jaw tightens. I set my phone down on the nightstand without making a sound. I wait. The knocking is steady. Tap, 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 every few seconds. My heart thumps so hard I feel it in my ears. After about 10 seconds, I swing my legs off the bed and stand up. The floor is cool under my feet. I can't help but notice how my breath is shallow. I try to control it so I don't make any noise. I approach the sliding door and reach for the curtain. I hesitate. My instincts tell me to turn on the outside light first. But I also know that every other time I've done that, the tapping has stopped, and I see nothing. This time I want to catch whoever or whatever is out there by surprise. I grab my phone from the nightstand with one hand, ready to record if I see something unusual. I slowly pull the curtain an inch to peek outside. I see darkness and the faint outline of the fence. Nothing else. The tapping continues, but I still don't see a silhouette. I can't detect any shape moving. The glass is right in front of me, so if there was a person, I should at least see a shadow. Instead, it looks empty. I decide to flick on the outside light. I do it quickly, hoping to reveal whoever's out there. The tapping stops at the same moment the light comes on. I press my face to the glass, scanning every corner of the yard. The camera at the top of the house records everything, and my phone should be showing a live feed. I open the app. The feed is black for a second, then it shows the yard. Nothing's moving. No figure, no animal, no sign of a person crouching or hiding. My side gate is shut. The fence is intact. There's nobody out there, at least nobody visible. I stand there for a minute, just looking. My arms feel shaky. I can sense the adrenaline in my system. My heart rate is slowing down, but I still feel tense. Eventually, I lock the door again. I draw the curtain shut and sit on the edge of my bed. This is the third night in a row. I don't feel safe anymore. I don't know if it's a prank or a trick, but it's unnerving. Whoever it is, if it's a person, they're smart enough to avoid the cameras. I check the recorded clips on my security system for the last hour. The file is empty. It logs no movement. That makes no sense. Usually, even a passing cat triggers the system. But I find nothing. Just a dark video feed. I replay it a few times. I feel a small sweat forming on my forehead because I can't figure out how someone could knock on my door without triggering the camera. Maybe they're behind the camera's blind spot, but how would they know exactly where to stand? I decide to go outside and check the yard. It's risky, but I can't keep sitting here in fear. I grab a jacket, slip on my sneakers, and pick up a flashlight from the hallway closet. I unlock the sliding door and step onto the small patio. The outside air is cool and still. I feel goosebumps on my arms. I shine the flashlight around. The beam cuts across the ground, the fence, and the walls. I see no footprints, no marks on the glass, nothing that suggests someone was standing there. The dirt by the fence looks undisturbed. I walk around the side yard, shining the flashlight along the fence line, checking behind the small barbecue grill, looking under the patio furniture. I see no one. I turn off the flashlight for a second to see if maybe I can sense motion in the darkness. There's nothing, just complete silence. No rustling of leaves, no footsteps. I realize I'm holding my breath. I exhale slowly, then flick the flashlight back on. I check the camera on the side of the house. It's mounted about 8 feet high, angled to capture anyone near the sliding door. I tap it lightly, and it's solid. The lens looks clear. I don't see any sign of tampering. I decide to walk around to the front yard. My driveway is empty except for my car. The streetlights are dim, but it's enough to see that nobody's lurking around. The gate is locked. I test it to make sure. Everything appears normal. After a few minutes of searching, I go back inside. I lock the sliding door, double-check the front door, and make sure all windows are closed. My body feels tight, like I've been working out. I'm exhausted, but too wound up to sleep. I sit on the couch in the living room and scroll through my phone's video feed from earlier. Still no sign of movement. I decide to stay up the rest of the night. I make some coffee, even though it's almost 2 in the morning. My nerves are on edge. My hands shake a bit as I sip from the mug. I keep thinking about the tapping. It was real, not a dream. The sound was direct, clear. Someone or something knocked on my door, but they vanished whenever I tried to catch them. The idea of an intruder playing games with me makes me uneasy. Around 3 a.m., I hear a slight noise at the opposite end of the house. It's near the living room windows facing the front yard. It's not a tap. It's more like a shuffle or a low thud. I mute the TV, which I had turned on for background noise, and listen. My pulse starts racing again. I walk toward the window and look through the blinds. I don't see anything. I stay quiet for a while, trying to sense if there's more movement. It's silent again. Maybe it was the house settling. Maybe it was the refrigerator. I keep telling myself that, but I can't ignore my rising panic. I decide to do another sweep outside. I turn on the porch light this time. Nothing moves. The camera feed doesn't show anything unusual. I lock the door and go back to the living room. I keep the TV off now. I want to hear everything clearly. The rest of the night passes without more noises. I end up crashing on the couch around 5 in the morning. My sleep is broken. I wake up around 8:30 a.m. to daylight filling the house. My body aches, and my head hurts a bit from the stress. I get up, walk to the kitchen, and make another pot of coffee. My phone shows no new alerts from the cameras. I decide to call a friend of mine who's into home security. He's not a professional, but he's done a lot of his own installations and troubleshooting. I explain the situation. He suggests that maybe my camera is malfunctioning or the motion detection is turned off at certain hours. I assure him I've already checked the settings. Everything is set to record 24/7. He offers to come by after work to take a look. That afternoon, I inspect the yard again in daylight. I check every inch for clues. The door is clean, no smudges or prints. The ground is dry, no footprints or shoe marks. The fence is locked. There's nowhere for a person to hide. I feel uneasy about the possibility of someone climbing over the fence. It's around 6 feet high, which is not impossible to climb, but it's not comfortable either. I wonder if I should install more cameras or even get motion-activated floodlights. My friend arrives around 6 p.m. He's tall and looks confident, which makes me feel a little calmer. He checks the camera wiring, the app settings, and the recording logs. Everything is normal. We stand in the yard, analyzing angles and possible blind spots. He says it's weird. There's no perfect hiding spot that would let someone tap on the glass without getting caught on camera. We wait until it gets dark. I leave the outside light off to replicate the conditions from previous nights. My friend waits in the yard while I stay inside. Around 11:30 p.m., we switch places. Neither of us hears or sees anything. By midnight, he's tired. He leaves, but he promises to call me in the morning to see what happened overnight. I sit in the living room, staring at the cameras on my TV screen. Time crawls by. Midnight passes, then 1 a.m. I feel the tension building. My eyes grow heavy, but I force them open, not wanting to miss anything. I almost think the tapping won't happen tonight, but at about 1:40 a.m., there it is. Soft, methodical taps on the glass door near my bedroom. My stomach clenches. I jump to my feet and run to the hallway. The tapping continues. My heartbeat is loud, and my ears feel hot. I move slowly toward the bedroom. I stop at the doorframe and listen. The taps are steady. I pull out my phone, open the camera app. Then I inch toward the sliding door. My mouth is dry. I don't want to speak or make a noise. I stand there, maybe 2 feet from the glass. The curtain is shut, but I can see the outline of the yard through it. The tapping is so close, it's almost like someone is right on the other side. My instinct screams to flip on the outside light again, but I'm worried the moment I do, it'll stop and I'll see nothing again. I decide to pull the curtain open just enough to stick my phone out and record. My hand shakes as I press the record button. I slide my phone between the curtain and the glass, aiming it outside. I hear the tapping continue for another second or two, and then it stops. I whip the curtain open. Nothing. I'm staring at my yard bathed in darkness. No figure, no shadow, no movement. My phone camera shows nothing but the faint outline of the fence. I slam the curtain shut again, my chest tight with fear. I flick on the light. The yard looks empty. I throw the door open and step out. The cool air hits me, and I shout, "Who's there?" My voice shakes, but I don't care. I run to the fence, shine my phone flashlight around. There's no one. I look up at the security camera. It's pointed directly at this spot. I know it should have recorded everything. I check my phone. The motion sensor alert didn't trigger. I tap on the recent clip. Black screen. It's only a few seconds long. No activity. The audio shows a faint tapping, but the video is completely dark. I stand there, breathing heavily, scanning the entire area. I don't see footprints. I don't see a ladder. I don't see a door left open. I'm wide awake, adrenaline pumping. It makes no sense that nothing is caught on camera. I check the rest of the perimeter. Everything is locked. I feel sweat on my neck despite the chill in the air. I go back inside. My heart rate stays high and my muscles feel tight. I lock the sliding door again. I go to the living room and throw myself onto the couch. I feel the urge to keep every light in the house on, but part of me thinks that might not change anything. The tapping happens no matter what I do. I stay awake until dawn. No more knocks, no more strange sounds. When the sunlight starts to seep through the windows, I feel some relief. I get up, my body stiff from lying on the couch. I grab my phone and review the recording. It's exactly like I saw. Black video with tapping sounds for a moment before it stops. I have no explanation. There's no visible shape, no reflection, no sign of a person or an animal. Later, I call my friend again. He suggests I call the police. I hesitate, because how do I explain that something taps on my door and doesn't show up on camera? But maybe it's worth filing a report in case something else happens. I decide to wait one more night to see if it continues. Then I'll talk to the authorities. Now it's mid-afternoon. I'm sitting at my kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, trying to stay alert. I have a feeling it will happen again tonight. I don't know who's behind it or how they're managing to avoid detection. All I know is it's not normal. I can't ignore it any longer. If it happens again, I'll have no choice but to get help. But for now, I'm stuck in this cycle of waiting, worrying, and listening for those taps in the dark. That's all I've got. Tension, exhaustion, and a growing sense that something out there wants my attention. I just don't know why. I never thought a simple home project could turn into something so unsettling. I had planned to break up my old sidewalk, pour new cement, and move on with my life. Instead, I found myself staring at footprints that shouldn't exist. Let me tell you exactly what happened and why I still feel uneasy every time I look outside my front window. My name is Daniel. I've owned my house for about 10 years, and the sidewalk leading up to my front door has always had cracks and uneven spots. People often stumbled on it, and I worried it was a hazard. So last week I decided to tear up the old concrete and lay fresh cement. I prepared everything the day before. I rented a small concrete mixer, got my tools ready, and planned to get started first thing in the morning. It was a warm day and I woke up early to start the work. I remember the sun was bright, and I could feel the heat on my arms. I broke up the old concrete with a sledgehammer and hauled the chunks into a pile. My neighbor Carlos passed by and gave me a thumbs up. He's a friendly guy, always ready to lend a hand, but I told him I was fine handling it on my own. I kept a steady rhythm, lifting, braking, dumping. After a couple of hours, I finished clearing the space. Dust coated my clothes and my back was aching, but I felt good about getting it done. I set up the wooden frames to outline where I wanted the new sidewalk. Everything was level, and I double-checked with a spirit level to make sure I wouldn't have that awkward slope again. I turned on the mixer, poured in the cement, gravel, sand, and water, and let it churn. The sound of the rotating drum was loud, and I had my headphones on to keep my ears from ringing. I kept adding material, checking the consistency, and then wheeled over barrow after barrow of wet cement. I spread it, smoothed it with a trowel, and took my time to make it look right. By late afternoon, I had a solid new sidewalk shaped and ready to dry. I went inside around 5 p.m., took a shower, and relaxed in front of the TV. My legs were sore from hauling cement, and my arms felt heavy, but I was proud of my work. I glanced outside through the front window a couple of times to admire the fresh cement. It was still wet in some spots, with a smooth gray surface that looked perfect. Before heading to bed, I stepped onto my porch, checked it again under the porch light, and everything was fine. No footprints, no smudges, nothing. I figured it would dry overnight, and I'd have a brand new walkway by morning. The next day, I woke up with a stiff back but in a good mood. I got dressed, went to the kitchen, made some coffee, and peeked outside. That's when I saw them. 2 large footprints pressed deep into the cement. They started near the front door, then moved forward a few steps and stopped abruptly near the street. Each print was big, maybe size 12 or 13. I saw the toes, the heel, the arch. They looked too precise to be random. My first thought was that maybe some late-night prankster had walked through my yard, messed with the cement, and then jumped off the edge. But it didn't make any sense. Why only 2 footprints? And why were they so cleanly defined? I felt an immediate wave of anger. All my hard work was ruined by some jerk who decided to sneak around at night. I marched outside, still holding my coffee. The footprints were deep, which meant the concrete must have been soft enough for someone to sink in. But the pattern stopped after 2 steps, like the person either disappeared or stepped onto something else. The street is only a few feet away at that point, so maybe they landed on the curb or hopped somewhere. I crouched down to check the edges, but there was no sign of partial prints on the grass or the curb. Just 2 full footprints in the cement, and then nothing. I looked around the neighborhood, scanning for any fresh footprints in dirt or patches of mud. I found nothing. The grass was undisturbed, and the sidewalk leading away from my house had no marks. I felt a twist in my stomach. It was bizarre. I walked around my house, checking the backyard, the sides, the driveway, but saw no sign of anything unusual. Then I remembered I had installed security cameras. One is above my garage facing the driveway and sidewalk, and another is above my front door. I keep them running all the time. I rushed back inside, still a bit ticked off, but also confused. I turned on my computer, pulled up the camera feeds from the night before. I knew the approximate time frame. The cement was still wet around midnight, so I started checking from that time onward. I saw nothing. The camera showed an empty street, the porch light shining, and a few moths fluttering around the bulb. No people, no animals, no movement at all, except a stray cat passing by around 2 a.m. But the cat just walked along the curb and didn't go near the cement. I fast-forwarded, slowed it down at certain parts, and kept scanning. There was absolutely no one. Yet there were those footprints outside. I checked the other camera. Same thing. Nothing. It was as though the sidewalk had been untouched. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe the feed was corrupted or there was a glitch. But everything else was normal. Lights turning on at certain hours, the occasional car passing in the distance, nothing out of place. I felt a cold sensation in my gut. The footprints were real. I walked outside again to confirm I wasn't imagining them. They were there, clear as day, pressed into the cement. I placed my foot next to one print, just to gauge the size difference. and it was definitely bigger than my own shoe, and deeper. Whoever made them must have been pretty heavy, or the cement was soft enough to give way without much pressure. My phone was in my pocket, so I snapped a few pictures. Then I touched the surface of the concrete. It had hardened enough by the morning that I couldn't even dent it with my finger. That meant the footprints must have appeared at a specific window of time when the cement was still pliable. I started to feel uneasy. I thought about calling the police, but what would I report? Some unknown person stepped onto my fresh cement. That's not exactly a crime wave. And there was no property damage aside from messing up the sidewalk. It just made me nervous that someone came onto my property while I was asleep. I decided to call Carlos to see if he had heard or seen anything. Carlos picked up on the second ring. His voice sounded groggy, like I woke him up. I asked if he noticed any late-night visitors in the neighborhood. He said no. He had gone to bed around 10 p.m. and didn't hear anything unusual. I told him about the footprints and how they stopped abruptly. He offered to come take a look. I said sure. 10 minutes later, he walked over. We stood together, staring at the prints. Carlos is taller and heavier than me, so I asked him to put his foot in one of them just as a reference. His boot was smaller. Then I asked him to check around the area for any sign of tracks. He didn't see anything in the yard or on the street. He even checked his own camera footage. Same story. Nothing. We went back to my porch and sat down, both of us looking at the concrete. Neither of us had any logical explanation. I suggested maybe someone wore special shoes that didn't show up on camera, but that sounded ridiculous. Cameras record light, not footprints. If a person was there, we'd see them, unless they were somehow invisible on camera, which made no sense. The rest of the day I tried to stay busy. I patched up the footprints as best I could by mixing a small batch of cement and spreading it into the impressions. It looked rough, and the outlines were still there, but at least it wasn't as deep. I felt uneasy every time I pressed the trowel into those prints. My heart was beating a little faster, and I couldn't shake the image of someone standing there in the middle of the night, sinking their feet into my wet cement. That evening, I tried to go about my normal routine. I cooked dinner, watched some TV, and tried to relax, but my mind kept drifting back to those prints. I kept checking the clock, wondering if I should set up some extra security measures. Finally, around 10 p.m., I decided to go outside and put fresh batteries in the porch light sensors just to be safe. Standing on my porch in the darkness, I felt jumpy. My eyes scanned the yard, the street, the corners where the light didn't reach. I heard the distant hum of cars from a main road a few blocks away. A breeze came through and the leaves rustled. I walked down the new sidewalk slowly. The patches I made were still visible. I kept looking for any sign of movement. Nothing. I stayed there for about 10 minutes, then went back inside, double-checked the doors and windows, and tried to sleep. I had a restless night. I dreamed about hearing footsteps outside my window, but I couldn't see anyone. I'd jump up in bed sweating and then realize it was just the wind or some random noise. By morning, I felt exhausted. When I stepped outside, the sidewalk was the same as I left it. No new footprints. That gave me some relief. I decided to check the security footage again. Maybe I missed something, or maybe something else happened. I skimmed through the night's recording, but there was nothing unusual. A few cars driving by in the distance, a couple of late-night joggers on the other side of the street around 11 p.m., but nobody near my place. I turned off the monitor, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering worry. Over the next few days, nothing else happened. But every time I passed those footprints, I was reminded of that strange night. I started triple-checking my locks, and I made a habit of scanning my yard after dark. I don't feel comfortable standing on my porch at night anymore, and it bugs me that I can't explain what happened. Carlos asked if I wanted to file a report with the police just for documentation. I decided not to. I didn't have anything solid to show them. Footprints in wet cement aren't exactly a mystery that the police would dedicate time to. Plus, there was no footage of anyone. The entire situation felt like a dead end. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe some random person was messing around and somehow they managed to avoid the camera angles. But it seemed unlikely because the cameras cover most of my front yard. And why were there only 2 footprints? It's like they appeared out of nowhere and left just as quickly. A few nights later, Carlos and I sat on his porch having a couple of beers. We talked about work, sports, random stuff. Eventually, the conversation drifted back to the footprints. I remember leaning forward in my chair, rubbing my forehead and saying, "Dude, I don't know what to think." Carlos nodded. "It's freaky," he said, "but nothing else has happened, right?" I shook my head. "No, nothing. I guess I'll just keep my eyes open." That's where things stand now. My sidewalk has a patched spot that still shows the faint outline of those 2 footprints. My cameras never recorded any person walking there at night. I haven't found any other clues around the neighborhood. No one else reported anything strange, yet I have that physical proof in the cement that someone or something was there. I still feel anxious when night falls. I keep my outdoor lights on, and sometimes I'll glance out the window, half expecting to see a dark shape or hear heavy steps on the pavement. But so far, it's been quiet. It's almost worse this way because I don't have an answer. If I could blame a prankster, I'd have closure. If I had seen someone messing around, I'd know what I'm dealing with. But I got nothing except those footprints that stop out by the street as if whoever left them simply vanished. Even now, talking about it makes my chest feel tight. I don't like the idea that someone invaded my space while I was sleeping. I also don't like that my cameras, which I trusted, didn't catch a single frame of whoever did this. It makes me feel vulnerable. I've been considering upgrading my security system to a higher resolution camera, or maybe even motion-activated floodlights. But the truth is, part of me wonders if it would make a difference. If someone managed to appear on my property and leave clear footprints without being seen once, maybe no equipment will help. For now, I'm just living with it. Every day, I step outside, see the sidewalk, and think about that night. The footprints are still there, shallow but visible. I have pictures of them on my phone, and sometimes I stare at those pictures, zooming in, looking at the ridges and edges, trying to see if there's a clue I missed. But there's nothing. Just 2 big human-like prints left in my cement with no sign of who put them there or how they vanished so quickly. That's my story. It's straightforward, but it left me uneasy in a way I can't fully describe. I keep telling myself it's probably just someone messing around. But I know how my cameras work, and I know that the prints go no farther than the sidewalk. It doesn't add up. So, if you ever notice footprints that shouldn't be there, check your cameras. And if you see nothing, well, you might end up feeling like I do. Always on edge, looking over your shoulder and scanning the darkness for something you can't explain. I got home around midnight on a Tuesday. I was in a bad mood because work ran later than usual and the drive back felt longer than ever. My shoulder ached from hunching over my desk all day. I climbed out of my car and walked toward my front door, feeling the night air cling to my skin. Then I noticed a figure in the window of the neighboring house. It was the house on the left, a 2-story place with peeling paint on the upstairs shutters. I saw a pale face peering from behind the glass on the top floor. He had white hair and a blank expression. I froze on my front steps and just stared for a few seconds. My legs felt heavy. I was sure he was looking directly at me. I shook it off and went inside. The living room felt stale because I hadn't opened any windows before leaving. I dumped my keys on the small table by the door and headed to the kitchen. I remember standing in the dark, leaning against the counter, trying to decide if I'd just seen some reflection or maybe a shadow. But the face in that window looked solid. I felt uneasy. My chest felt tight, and I kept replaying the moment in my head. Eventually, I shrugged it off and tried to sleep. I told myself it was late and I was in a weird mood. The next day, after work, I decided to talk to my neighbor. She's a quiet woman in her 50s. We've exchanged small talk before, mostly about yard work or local weather. I knocked on her front door around 6 in the evening. She answered quickly, as if she'd been standing close by. I said hello and mentioned that I'd seen someone in her upstairs window the previous night. I described an older man with white hair. She looked confused. She said she lives alone. She told me there must be some mistake. I pressed her gently, just saying that I noticed him around midnight. She shook her head and said she's the only one who's been in the house all week. She denied having anyone staying over or even visiting. I felt a flicker of discomfort. I thanked her, apologized for bothering her, and headed back to my place. I didn't see him again that night. I stayed up later than usual, trying to keep busy. I did laundry, I washed dishes, I paced around. I glanced out my kitchen window a couple of times, hoping to spot something in her upstairs window. Nothing happened. It was all darkness. No lights turned on over there, not even for a moment. On Thursday night, I got home around 10. I parked my car, looked toward her place, and saw the upstairs light switch on. The old man's face appeared again. This time, he stared straight ahead, not down at me. I walked to my front door, looked over my shoulder, and realized he was turning his head as I passed by. I felt a chill that began at the base of my neck. My hand started shaking when I tried to unlock the door. I dropped my keys once. When I got inside, I locked the door behind me. My breathing was shallow. I left my lights off and moved to a corner of the living room where I could peek through the curtains. The old man stayed there for a while, maybe a full minute, then turned off the light and vanished from sight. I felt my stomach tense. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt scratchy. I considered going over there right away and knocking on the door again, but the idea sent a wave of anxiety through my chest. Instead, I stayed in my house, restless and uneasy. I slept poorly that night. I woke up around 3 in the morning and decided to take a look out my window again. My eyes had trouble adjusting to the darkness. I couldn't see anything except the faint outline of the neighboring house. The top window looked empty. No light, no movement. I went back to bed but couldn't settle down. My brain kept spinning with questions. If she claims she lives alone, who is this guy? The next day, I decided to be more direct. I knocked on her door around noon, hoping to catch her at home. She answered, looking polite but a bit tense. I told her calmly that I definitely saw an older man in her upstairs window more than once. She stuck to her story. There's no one else in her house. Her tone was firm, but her eyes darted around. It was like she was hiding something, or maybe she just thought I was imagining things. I could see her hands gripping the door frame. They trembled a little. I asked if she'd mind showing me the upstairs room so I could see for myself. She hesitated, then said she preferred not to. She said she values her privacy. I didn't want to force the issue, so I just said I understood, but I couldn't ignore how uneasy she looked. Before she closed the door, she told me to stop worrying and to take care of myself. The way she said it gave me a weird feeling, like she was concerned about my mental state. I felt uneasy all day. I tried to work, but my mind kept drifting. That night, around midnight, I returned home and parked in my usual spot. I glanced up and saw the upstairs window lit again. The old man appeared, just like before. He stood near the glass, looking out. I stood there by my car, staring back. I could see more details this time, maybe because the light was brighter. He wore a dark sweater and his hair was thin and white. His face had a blank expression, but his eyes seemed intense. My pulse raced. My throat felt dry. I almost shouted something, but I couldn't form words. My heart pounded as I walked slowly toward my house. I felt my legs stiffen with each step. I got inside and hurried to the living room. I flicked off the light so I could look out without being noticed. I crouched by the window, pushing the curtain aside just a bit. The old man was still there, standing like a statue. I felt sweat forming on my forehead. My cheeks felt hot. After a few seconds, he reached up with one hand and touched the window, like he was trying to feel something beyond the glass. Then he stepped back into the room and the light flicked off. My heart thudded in my chest. I let out a shaky breath, then tried to calm down. I stared at the dark window for a while, waiting to see if he would return. Nothing happened. After that, I had trouble focusing on anything else for the rest of the night. I decided I needed more information. On Saturday morning, I saw my neighbor step out to get her mail and I approached her. I explained that I was concerned about her safety. I said if there was someone in her house, maybe she wasn't aware of it. She became annoyed and told me she didn't want to discuss the matter anymore. I backed off, but as I walked away, I noticed her posture was stiff, like she was bracing herself. I started wondering if maybe the old man was someone she didn't want to admit was living there. Maybe a relative she was hiding. But why deny it so strongly? That night, I bought a small camera, the kind you can mount on a window. I wanted proof of what I was seeing. My plan was to point it at her upstairs window and record any movement. I set it up carefully in my spare bedroom, which faces her house. I kept the lights off and positioned the camera at an angle so it wouldn't catch too much glare. Around 10, I turned it on. Then I waited, sitting in a chair next to the window, occasionally glancing at the live feed on my phone. I felt a knot in my stomach. My shoulders were tense. Every little sound outside made me jump. Just after midnight, the upstairs window lit up. My heart sped up. I checked the camera feed on my phone. There he was. The old man's face came into view. He stood there for maybe 30 seconds. Then he moved aside. I could see part of the room behind him, but not much detail. A bare wall, maybe a dresser in the corner. It was hard to tell. My hands trembled. I wanted to capture every moment, so I made sure the camera was recording. Then at one point, he turned his head in my direction. He paused. I couldn't see his eyes clearly, but I sensed he was looking right at me. It made my heart pound in my chest. I felt a tightness in my rib cage, like I couldn't take a full breath. After a few seconds, he disappeared from view. The light stayed on for another minute, then clicked off. I felt my shirt sticking to my back from sweat. I pressed my hands against my face and took a few deep breaths. I decided to review the footage right away. I played it back on my phone. Sure enough, the old man's face was plain as day. No question about it. I saved the file and sat there, staring at the paused image. He looked so real. His features were clear. Pale skin, sharp nose, thin lips. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling my hands shake. I wondered how in the world she could deny his presence. The next morning, I walked over to her place again and knocked on the door. I felt a flicker of anxiety. My stomach churned. She opened up looking tired. I told her I needed to show her something. She refused, said she had no interest in what I was going to say about the stranger. I felt frustration rise inside me. I insisted, telling her I had proof. She shook her head, mumbled something about not wanting to see any videos. Before I could protest, she shut the door. My heart was pounding. I stood there for a minute, breathing fast. Then I headed back to my place feeling confused and upset. That evening I sat in my living room with the lights off, thinking about what to do next. I could call the police, but what would I say? There's a man in my neighbor's upstairs window and she denies it. They might check on her, but if she's not willing to show them the upstairs, I'm not sure how far they'd go. Still, the thought of ignoring the situation felt wrong. My nerves were raw and I was sure something bad was going on next door. My head ached from tension. I decided to watch the window again. I set up the camera. Around midnight, the light turned on in the upstairs room. I caught a glimpse of movement. The old man stepped into view. This time he opened the window. He leaned out slightly, looking across the gap toward my house. The hair on my arms rose. I could hear faint noises like the squeak of the window frame through my open bedroom window. I stood by my camera, heart racing. He didn't say anything. He just looked out. Then, I heard a dull thump, like he set something on the windowsill. My hands started sweating. I kept staring, waiting to see what he would do. He reached one hand outside, let it hang there, and then pulled it back. After maybe a minute, he closed the window. The light went off. I felt my body shake with adrenaline. I tried to calm down, but every muscle felt tight. I sat down on the edge of my bed, listening to my own breathing. My mouth was dry and my chest felt heavy. I checked the camera recording. The footage was the same as before, except this time he definitely opened the window. I decided I needed some air. I walked outside, around to the side of my house, and looked up at her place. Everything was dark. The only sounds were a few crickets. My neighbor's backyard was completely still. A single light over her back porch illuminated the steps, but no other movement. The air felt cool, but my shirt clung to me from stress. On Monday, I called out of work, telling them I wasn't feeling well. The truth was, I couldn't focus on anything else. I stayed home trying to see if anything happened during the day. The old man never appeared in the daylight. The neighbor came and went a couple of times, but I didn't talk to her. I considered knocking again, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I felt uneasy enough without another confrontation. That night, I sat in my living room, lights off, waiting again. Around 11, I heard a strange creaking noise like someone was on my front porch. My heart jumped. I stood up, approached the door, and listened. It was quiet for a moment. Then I heard a light scrape, like metal against wood. I felt sweat bead on my forehead. Slowly, I flicked on the porch light and looked through the peephole. Nothing was there. The porch was empty. I opened the door a crack, just enough to peek outside. I saw no one. I checked the driveway. My neighbor's house looked the same as always. Dark windows, no sign of movement. I shut the door, locked it, and returned to my seat. My pulse was still hammering. A short while later, the upstairs light next door turned on. I looked out my window. The old man was there again. This time I didn't move. I stayed at the window watching him. My legs felt tense, like I was ready to run at any second. My breathing was shallow. He stepped back from the window. I could see him walking around the room. Then the curtains slid shut. I blinked. She usually kept them open, or maybe they were never fully closed. Either way, the curtains were now drawn, blocking my view. My heart was thudding against my ribcage. I grabbed my phone and checked the live camera feed. The old man was no longer visible. The curtains were closed. The light stayed on behind them, though. There was just a soft glow. I felt powerless. A wave of frustration and nervous energy passed through me. I paced around my living room, trying to decide what to do. I considered walking over there, knocking on her door and demanding an explanation. But every time I pictured that scenario, I felt a spike of anxiety. I recalled how she acted when I tried to confront her with the video. I also worried about what might happen if the old man answered instead. I ended up standing by my front window for the rest of the night, waiting for the upstairs window to change. Around 2 in the morning, the light went off. I don't know if he was still there or not, but I never saw him open the curtains again. Eventually, I fell asleep on my couch, my mind spinning with questions. The next few nights were similar. I came home, saw occasional glimpses of him, recorded video on my camera, and got more confused each time. The neighbor refused to acknowledge anything. She avoided me if I tried to get her attention. I felt my stress building up. My shoulders stayed tense all day. I was tired, jumpy, and consumed by the idea that something was very wrong next door. But I had no idea how to fix it. I kept telling myself that if there was a serious threat, I should involve the authorities, but I was scared of looking paranoid. Plus, she might lie, and I'd have no solid proof beyond a video of some old man in a window. That might not convince anyone of anything. At the moment, I'm sitting here typing this out on my phone, trying to figure out my next move. It's late. I have the camera set up again. The upstairs window is dark right now, but I'm sure he'll appear soon. I feel tense, my back hurts from all the time I've spent crouched by windows. My eyes burn from lack of sleep. I keep replaying the same thoughts. Who is he? Why won't she admit he's there? Why do I feel like I'm the only one who notices him? I keep looking at the time on my phone. It's almost midnight. My neighbor's house is quiet. I'm waiting for that light to switch on. I'm waiting to see the old man's face, or maybe something else. I'm dreading the moment, but I can't resist it. I feel drawn to the window like I have to watch. Maybe tonight will be different, maybe something else will happen. Or maybe I'll just see the same blank stare, the same thin white hair, the same unanswered questions. And I'm not sure how much longer I can live like this. waiting for an old man in the window to appear every night, pretending everything is fine. But for now, all I can do is stay awake, stay alert, and keep recording what I see. I still remember how my hands shook the first time it happened. I was on my way to my night shift, heading down that quiet back road I always take. Out there's hardly any traffic, and most people avoid it after dark because it's dirt and full of potholes. But I don't mind. It usually feels calm, and I like to keep my windows halfway down to let the cool air in. That night, though, something changed. I caught a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. Nothing unusual at first. I assumed another driver had decided to use the back road. But then the headlights vanished. One moment I saw the glare reflecting off my mirror, and the next second, they were gone. Like the driver had flipped off the lights or turned onto some invisible side road. It gave me this weird, jumpy feeling in my stomach, but I told myself it was probably nothing. I shrugged it off and kept driving. The next night, it happened again. I was maybe halfway to work and I saw those headlights behind me. This time I decided to slow down a little just to see if the car would catch up. I even considered pulling over, figuring maybe the driver was in a hurry. The moment I tapped my brakes and steered toward the shoulder, I glanced up to check the mirror. Nothing. No lights. No sign of a car. I stared into the darkness behind me and felt my heart thudding harder than normal. I rolled my window all the way up and turned down the radio. I stayed there on the side of the road for a good minute, listening to the chirping crickets and the rustling of leaves in the wind. No engine sounds, no headlights. It felt like I was alone in some strange bubble, and it made my neck tense up. I took a few deep breaths, checked my phone, and continued to work, trying to ignore the jitters in my chest. By the third night, I was on edge before I even started the drive. I left home around 10 like usual and headed down the same route. The first few miles passed without incident. The only light came from the moon and my car's headlights. My radio played low, mostly static, and the occasional late-night talk show. I stayed alert, eyes flicking to the mirror every few seconds. Then I saw them again. Two small orbs of light, bouncing a bit as if coming from a vehicle behind me on the uneven road. My pulse jumped and I noticed a light sweat forming under my arms. I gripped the steering wheel tight and planned to stop sooner, maybe shine my flashlight behind me once I pulled over. I eased onto the shoulder, tires crunching over gravel and dry dirt. My heart pounded as I twisted around to look out the rear windshield. Those lights were still there, bobbing along, getting closer. But the second I flicked on my hazard lights, they disappeared. It was like someone yanked the plug on a lamp. My mouth went dry. I got out of the car, feeling the cool night breeze across my face. The air smelled like dust and distant weeds. I scanned the dark with my phone's flashlight. No car, no sign of anyone, just the quiet hum of insects and the soft rustle of branches. My breathing went shallow, and I felt this low-level panic start crawling up my spine. But I had no choice. I had to keep going to work. So I got back in, shut the door, and drove off. Keeping my focus pinned straight ahead, my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. At work, I tried to tell a couple of my colleagues about it. I half expected them to laugh or tease me for letting my imagination get to me. But a few of them looked concerned. One guy asked if maybe there was a curve in the road or a hidden driveway. Another suggested maybe it was an ATV with no rear lights that turned off. I couldn't argue with any of that, but I knew something felt off. The headlights vanished too fast. It didn't look like a turn signal or brake lights or anything normal. It just disappeared. The next week, the pattern continued. Every other night or so, I'd see those headlights. They would show up around the same stretch of road a few miles into the dirt path. I tried everything I could think of to figure it out. I slowed down. I rolled my window down and listened for an engine. I stopped completely a few times, blinking my hazard lights, trying to wave them forward. Each time they just blinked out of existence. I started to dread that part of the drive. My stomach would twist in knots and I'd grip the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My breath would get shallow and my mind raced with questions. Where the hell did that car go? Why didn't I see any tire tracks on the shoulder when I checked in the morning? One evening, I decided to leave a bit earlier than usual, hoping maybe I could see this car in daylight. It was close to sunset. The sky was still a little orange, and the dirt road felt less eerie. For a few miles, I felt relieved. I thought maybe the weirdness wouldn't happen while there was still some light outside. But just as the sun dropped below the horizon, I saw movement in the mirror. At first, I thought it might be dust, kicked up by a car behind me. Then the headlights flicked on, bright and unmistakable. I was more annoyed than scared this time. I pulled over again, hopped out, and walked around to the back of my car. The headlights grew bigger and brighter. They were definitely heading my way. I stood there on the shoulder, arms folded, watching them approach. They got so close I could see the beams reflecting off the gravel. My heart hammered, but I wanted to see a real, solid vehicle. A second later, gone. The road behind me was empty. I shouted into the darkness, feeling a tremor in my voice. I was frustrated. It felt like I was being toyed with. My legs trembled, and my chest felt tight. My hands tingled from the adrenaline rush. I saw nothing but an empty road and the faint outline of shrubs. I took a moment to calm down, then got back in my car and drove the rest of the way, noticing how my body felt on high alert. My eyes stung from not blinking enough and my shoulders ached from tension. That experience stuck with me for days. I started to wonder if I was hallucinating or losing my grip on reality. I checked my coffee intake. I cut back on energy drinks. I asked a friend to ride with me one night just so I'd have a witness. He agreed, even though it meant staying up late. We took my car down that same road at around the same time. For the first 10 minutes, everything was normal. We made small talk. He teased me a bit, but I could tell he was nervous too. Then the lights appeared in the mirror. I pointed them out. "See?" I said, my voice tight. "Look behind us." He twisted around, craning his neck to see through the back windshield. "I see them," he said, sounding a little uneasy. "I definitely see them." I slowed down. The lights stayed with us, maybe 100 yards behind. My friend's eyes were wide, and he kept turning back to look at me. "Is this what you've been seeing?" he asked. "Exactly," I said. "Watch what happens when I pull over." I turned on my signal, gently pulled to the side, and put the car in park. We both looked back. The headlights were still there, getting closer. My friend said, "Should we get out?" I popped my door open an inch. Then, just like every time before, the lights winked out. My friend gasped. "Where'd they go?" he said, voice higher than usual. "Did you see that?" I didn't answer for a second. I felt this surge of relief because at least someone else had witnessed it too. We both climbed out of the car, shining our phone flashlights around. There was dust floating in the air, but the road was empty. No cars, no fresh tire tracks, no sign that anyone had turned off. Just the two of us standing in the middle of nowhere, with the stars above, and that strange silence all around. My friend swallowed hard. "This is messed up," he said, rubbing his arms. "I thought you were exaggerating, but this is... I don't even know, man." We got back in the car and finished the drive. The entire way, we barely spoke. We had goosebumps. We kept turning to see if the lights would come back, but they didn't. For the next few days, my friend avoided talking about it. He also stopped offering to ride with me, and I couldn't blame him. Over the next couple of weeks, the pattern persisted. Sometimes I'd see the lights, sometimes I wouldn't. I never saw them on my way home in the morning, only on my way to work at night. I started carrying a small camera in the passenger seat, hoping to catch a glimpse or record a quick video. But by the time I grabbed it, the lights always vanished. My heart would hammer every time I saw that glow in the mirror, and I'd fumble for the camera. But all I'd end up with was a shaky view of the dark. There was no point in showing people a video of blackness. It proved nothing. It only made me feel more frustrated. One night I decided to switch up my route. I took a longer paved road around the area, which added about 20 minutes to my commute. I arrived at work without any issues and felt relieved. But the next evening I got stuck in traffic on the main highway, so I resorted to the dirt road again, hoping maybe it had all stopped. It didn't. Right on schedule, the headlights popped up behind me. My chest tightened so much it almost hurt to breathe, and I felt that familiar rush of adrenaline in my limbs. I wanted to ignore it, but I couldn't. I glanced in the mirror again. The lights swayed up and down like a car bouncing over the ruts in the dirt. I kept driving this time, refusing to stop or slow down. My arms felt heavy and my spine prickled with sweat, but I pressed the gas a bit harder. The headlights stayed behind me for a minute or two, never getting closer than a few car lengths. Then they vanished without warning. I felt relief wash over me. My heart rate dropped back to something halfway normal. I loosened my grip on the steering wheel, and I noticed how my palms had left sweaty prints. That was the first time I'd tried just driving on without letting them catch up or pulling over. It seemed to work, in a sense, but it still left me shaky. Later, I tried telling a coworker about it again, the same one who had asked questions before. I explained how these lights only appear at night, on that same road. He offered a theory about some optical illusion caused by the angles of the dirt road, and maybe some reflection from the sky. But he admitted he didn't have a proper explanation, especially since my friend had seen it too. Another coworker joked that it was probably a weird local ghost story. I hated that explanation because I don't like thinking about the paranormal. I like things I can explain or fix. But I had no better answer. The worst part was how it started affecting me physically, even when I wasn't on that road. I'd get jittery at work, checking the time and dreading the commute. I'd sometimes stay late after my shift ended, hoping the sun would come up so I wouldn't have to drive home alone in the dark. But the headlights never appeared in the morning, so I gradually forced myself to leave on time. My sleep got messed up. I had trouble winding down. I'd wake up sweaty, heart pounding, thinking I saw bright lights outside my window. It was wearing me down. Then one weekend I decided to investigate the road in daylight. I had a day off, and I drove up and down the entire stretch. It's about 8 or 9 miles of dirt, winding through some farmland and empty fields. I saw a couple of old driveways leading to abandoned-looking properties, but nothing that stood out as a place a car could hide. I examined the shoulder where I had stopped so many times. It was just dirt and pebbles. No signs of fresh tire marks, except mine. I got out and walked around, hearing the crunch of dry grass under my boots. A few crows flew overhead, cawing. Otherwise, it was quiet. I didn't see anything that explained what I'd been experiencing. The emptiness of that road felt unnerving, even with the sun shining. I stood there for a while, hoping something would jump out at me as a clue, but there was nothing. That night, I had to go in again. I left the house feeling tense. My shoulders were stiff, and my neck ached. I played music louder than usual to distract myself. I spoke out loud in the car, telling myself I would ignore any headlights I saw. If they appeared, I'd keep driving. Maybe that was the key. Not giving in, not pulling over. About halfway through, I saw them in the mirror again, glowing bright. My chest tightened, and a wave of heat flushed through me. My scalp tingled. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to keep my speed steady. I didn't glance back more than a few times. Each time I did, the lights were still there. After maybe a full minute of this, they vanished. I felt an immediate sense of relief, like a weight dropping off my shoulders. That's how I learned to handle it. I stopped pulling over altogether. I realized that every time I tried to stop or wave them forward, the lights disappeared in a way that made my skin crawl. But if I kept driving, they would just blink out on their own eventually. It wasn't a perfect solution. I still felt a rush of panic whenever I spotted them. My muscles would tense and my mouth would go dry. But at least I could get through the drive without feeling like I was dangling a carrot in front of some invisible stalker. I kept this up for about a month. Some nights I wouldn't see the lights at all, and I started to think the whole thing had been some bizarre phase. But then they'd show up again, always on that same road, always behind me. Sometimes they hung around longer. Sometimes they vanished after a few seconds. I never saw them from the front, and I never heard an engine or saw any sign of an actual vehicle. It became part of my routine, in a twisted way. I wish I had some big answer for what's going on, but I don't. I've told a few more people about it, and most just look at me like I'm telling a wild story or pulling their leg. My friend who saw it that one time avoids the topic. I can't blame him. It's not the type of thing that feels comfortable to discuss. There's no resolution. There's no final confrontation or big reveal. It's just me driving on that dirt road, sometimes getting followed by headlights that vanish if I try to interact with them. Even now, I still take the same route when I have to, mostly because it's shorter. I keep my eyes forward and my mind focused on the road ahead. Whenever I catch those lights in the mirror, my breath catches in my throat for a second, but I just keep driving. The fear's still there, gripping my chest and tightening my shoulders, but it's not as overwhelming as it used to be. I've learned to manage it, at least enough to get by. People ask me why I don't just move or change jobs. The truth is, I need the shift pay, and my lease isn't up for a while. Besides, it's not like I see the lights every single night. Sometimes I go a week without them, but eventually they come back. I don't bother trying to film it anymore. I don't bother trying to pull over or check it out. I just keep going until it stops. That's all I can do. I won't pretend it doesn't bother me. Sometimes when I'm alone in bed, I think about those lights flickering behind me. So real and yet impossible. My heart speeds up at the thought, and I try to distract myself by reading or checking my phone. I don't talk about it much anymore, because there's nothing new to say. I've learned to live with it. So that's my story. There's no neat conclusion or evidence I can show you. All I can say is this. On my way to my night shift, along that lonely dirt road, I see headlights appear out of nowhere. When I try to let them pass, they vanish. When I stop, they vanish. When I keep driving, they eventually fade out on their own. It's been happening for a while, and I've never figured out why. That's just how it is. I drive, they appear, then they go away. It's a part of my nights now, and I've come to accept that I might never know the truth about what's behind those disappearing headlights. I woke up and saw nothing in the mirror. I saw the bathroom, the toothbrush on the sink, the shower curtain behind me, and even the towel hanging on the door. But I didn't see my own face. It was like my eyes, my nose, my entire body just didn't show up. At first, I thought it was some weird trick of the light. I leaned forward. I moved my head side to side. I turned the bathroom lights on and off. I tapped the mirror. I even splashed water on my face, hoping I'd snap out of it. But my reflection was gone. I felt my heart thumping harder than normal, and my breathing got rough. It wasn't just a smudge. I wasn't there. It made no sense. I ran my hands over my face to make sure I still existed in some normal way. I felt the stubble on my chin. I felt my cheeks tense, but the mirror still showed an empty spot where I should have been. I stood there for a minute or two, just staring at that blank space. My mind kept racing. I thought about calling someone, but I had no idea what to say. Hey, I can't see myself in a mirror. Sounds insane. So I did the next best thing. I tried to take a selfie. I picked up my phone, opened the camera app, and aimed it at myself. The screen showed the background behind me, but not me. It was like the phone was glitching, except it wasn't. I could move the phone, point it at my face from different angles, and I'd always see nothing but the room in the shot. My breathing got heavier, and I felt a cold sweat forming on my forehead. I put the phone down and paced around my apartment. My heart was pounding. I touched everything around me to stay grounded. I picked up a pen, threw it on the table. I opened the fridge, saw the normal stuff in there. I flicked the light switch on and off. Everything else seemed real and ordinary. But when I looked at the small window in the kitchen, I saw the neighborhood outside, and I didn't see my face reflecting in the glass. I pressed my fingertips to the window, leaning in. Nothing. There was no blurred silhouette or anything. It was like my presence didn't register on reflective surfaces. I felt panicked. My thoughts were all over the place. I had no idea what was going on. I wanted proof I wasn't hallucinating, so I texted a friend to ask if he could come over. While I waited, I looked in every mirror. every window in the apartment. Each time I saw only the surroundings, not me. My friend never got back to me, probably busy. I decided to step outside. I figured maybe some fresh air would help. I walked out of my building into the street. I tried to keep my head down and act normal, but inside I felt like I was about to scream. The day was sunny. I heard cars passing and people talking. I felt a breeze on my arms and smelled exhaust from a delivery truck. Everything felt normal except for me. I passed by a row of parked cars and glanced at the side mirrors. I saw the buildings and the sky reflected there, but my shape was missing. My stomach twisted. I pressed on. I turned a corner and saw a big glass window of a coffee shop. It was a clear surface, reflecting the sidewalk. I stood there, watching people walk by in the reflection, but I wasn't in it. I even lifted my hand, expecting to see at least a flicker of movement. Nothing. I felt lightheaded. I noticed a few people glancing at me, maybe because I was standing too still and staring. I decided to keep walking. I stopped at a convenience store to buy a bottle of water. The cashier greeted me and rang me up. She looked me in the eyes and had no weird reaction, which meant I was still physically there. My voice worked fine. She handed me my change without even flinching. So to everyone else, I was just a normal guy. But the mirrors, cameras, and windows disagreed. I walked out of the store and leaned against the wall. I took a few gulps of water, trying to calm down. That's when I saw something move in the corner of my eye. I turned and saw a faint outline in a car window across the street. It was shaped like a person. It almost looked like a reflection, but it wasn't lined up with anyone walking by. The figure moved its arm at the exact moment I raised my hand to drink. I froze. My heart banged in my chest and I felt a rush of cold sweat under my shirt. The shape was too far to make out details, but it definitely mimicked me. Or it tried to. Its movements were jerky. They didn't flow like a normal reflection. It felt wrong. I lowered my hand slowly, and the shape did the same. Then it started to twist in a way that didn't match my movement at all. It bent to the side while I stayed still. My stomach churned. It felt like it wanted to break free of mirroring me. A car drove by, and the figure vanished when the reflection changed. After a second, the window just showed the street again. My knees felt weak. I tried to steady my breathing. I needed to understand what was happening. I decided to go back to my apartment and check the mirrors again. On my way back, I kept peeking at every reflective surface. In a window above a store, I saw a quick flash of a shape that reminded me of that same outline. It flickered, then disappeared. I felt my pulse racing, and my shirt got damp around my collar from sweat. I just wanted to get home. In my apartment, I locked the door and went straight to the bathroom mirror. Still no reflection. I tried shining a flashlight from my phone on myself, but I saw the bathroom light up without me. I moved on to a small mirror in my bedroom. Same result. My body was absent, but the furniture behind me showed up perfectly. Then I heard a soft tapping sound by my window. I walked over and saw nothing unusual outside, just the view of the street. But as soon as I looked away, I heard the tap again. It sounded like someone gently tapping their nails on the glass. My heart raced. I forced myself to look at the window. The reflection wasn't me, but it was shaped like me, except it was hunched over a bit. Its limbs looked slightly longer. It was standing behind me in the reflection, even though there was nobody in the room. I whipped around, expecting to see something. There was nothing but empty space. I turned back to the window, and the figure was gone. My stomach felt like it was in knots. I tried to breathe slowly. My hands were shaking. I decided I'd leave the apartment again because staying there felt suffocating. But I also didn't want to run around outside. I didn't know where else to go. I ended up calling my boss and saying I was sick for the day. Then I just paced. I grabbed a towel, wiped the sweat from my forehead. I drank another bottle of water. Every few minutes I thought I saw something move in the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing. I sat down on my couch and tried to gather my thoughts, but all I could think about was that twisted reflection. I kept remembering how it moved on its own. At some point, I started to wonder if the reflections were trying to replace me. It sounds stupid, but that's the thought I had. I felt like if I let my guard down, that shape might step out of the mirror and take my place in the real world. I kept glancing at every reflective surface, worried it would appear again. I felt tension in my neck. My throat was dry, and I finished my water quickly. By mid-afternoon, I decided to try a different approach. I covered the mirrors. I took a blanket and threw it over the bathroom mirror. I draped a towel over the bedroom mirror. I pulled down the blinds so there wouldn't be reflections in the windows. I shut every curtain. The apartment got dim, but I felt a slight relief because I couldn't see any reflections. I didn't want to see that thing again. My phone buzzed. It was my friend returning my text. He said he was free to come over. I wasn't sure if I wanted him there because I didn't know how to explain any of this, but part of me needed someone to confirm I wasn't going crazy. I told him to come by. Then I waited. While waiting, I sat in the near dark and tried to calm down. I could still hear the occasional noise outside, like a car horn or someone walking up the hallway. But otherwise, it was quiet. My friend arrived about an hour later. I let him in, and he immediately asked why it was so dark. I told him I wasn't feeling well and I felt sensitive to light. He seemed concerned, but he sat down on a chair in the living room. I tried to bring up the mirror thing in a casual way. I said something like, "Hey, do I look weird to you?" He just shook his head and said I looked stressed, that was all. He reached for his phone and said, "Let me snap a picture." My heart skipped a beat, but I let him do it. When he looked at the screen, his face went pale. He turned the phone so I could see. The photo showed my couch and part of the wall behind it, but I wasn't in the frame. I saw my friend's knees where he had angled the phone, but in my spot, there was just empty space. He stared at it with his mouth slightly open. He didn't speak for a few seconds. My friend asked me if this was some kind of joke. I told him no. I stood up and said, "Look at me. I'm right here." He snapped another picture. Same result, no sign of me. He started swearing under his breath. He asked if I'd seen a doctor. I told him I didn't even know how to explain this to anyone. He seemed torn between fear and concern. He tried to keep calm, but I could tell he was freaked out. He asked to check the bathroom mirror. That's when I admitted I had covered it up. We went to the bathroom and I pulled down the blanket. The mirror showed him perfectly, standing behind me, but I was missing. His eyes went wide and he stepped back. I noticed his breathing got heavy. He told me I should come with him to the hospital, but I argued that I wasn't physically hurt. I felt fine except for the pounding in my chest and the terror in my head. I told him I was scared they'd lock me up in some psych ward if I said I couldn't see myself in mirrors. He didn't have a good response to that. We ended up just standing there, stuck. Suddenly the lights flickered, or maybe it just felt like they flickered because I was so on edge. We both heard a scraping noise from the living room window. We stepped out of the bathroom. My friend whispered, "What was that?" I had no answer. I moved toward the window, pulled the curtain aside a little. Nothing was there, but on the glass, I saw a faint shape. It was pressed against the inside of the reflection, if that makes sense. Like it was behind the glass, trying to push out. My friend asked me if I saw it. I said yes. He grabbed my shoulder and I felt his hand trembling. The shape in the window looked like me, but its eyes were sunken. Its body was slightly contorted, with one shoulder higher than the other. It wasn't a clear face, but enough that I could recognize it as an off-kilter version of me. It raised its hand and placed it against the glass. My friend pulled me back and I almost tripped over the coffee table. We both stared. My chest felt tight, and I could barely breathe. The shape started to tilt its head like it was studying us. Then it vanished, leaving only the reflection of the dark apartment. My friend practically dragged me to the hallway. He said he was leaving and I should come with him. He wanted me to stay at his place for the night, away from all these mirrors and windows. I hesitated because I was worried the shapes would follow me anywhere, but I also didn't want to stay alone. so I grabbed my keys, phone, and whatever else I needed. We left the apartment. My friend locked the door behind us and we headed down the stairs. Outside, the sun was setting. The streetlights were coming on, casting reflections on the hoods of parked cars. I tried not to look at them. We got into my friend's car, and he started the engine. As we drove, I stared at the side mirror. I didn't see myself in it, of course, but I saw a flicker of movement. One of those shapes was sitting in the backseat reflection, even though the backseat was empty. My friend must have seen something too, because he slammed on the brakes, causing the tires to squeal. I heard a horn from a car behind us. My friend cursed and kept driving, ignoring the honking. We pulled up to his building. By then, it was fully dark outside. We hurried in, avoiding eye contact with neighbors. He brought me up to his apartment, a small place with just a few windows. He drew the curtains, and we turned on the overhead lights. There was a mirror on the closet door, so we covered it with a blanket. We sat at his small dining table, feeling tense. I noticed my friend's leg was shaking under the table, and I couldn't stop tapping my fingers. We didn't know what to do next. He tried calling a friend of his who worked as a nurse, but no one answered. He left a message, something vague about needing advice. Then we both just stared at our phones, hoping for a call back. Time felt like it dragged. Every small noise made me jump. A siren passed outside, and the sound made my chest tighten. My friend kept checking the corners of the room. Occasionally, I thought I saw a flicker in the TV screen's reflection, but maybe it was just my imagination. We stayed like that for a few hours, too anxious to sleep. He offered me a blanket to crash on the couch. I eventually lay down, but every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that twisted shape staring back at me from a mirror. My breathing would get shallow, and I'd snap my eyes open, scanning the dim room. At one point, I saw a faint outline in the dark TV screen. It was crouched behind the couch, almost pressed against the back of my head. I jerked upright and turned around, but there was nothing. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might burst. I decided I couldn't lie down anymore. I got up and paced. My friend dozed off for a bit, but then he woke up startled by something. He said he had a nightmare about a shadowy figure in a mirror. We both stayed awake after that. We had no plan. We considered going to a hospital or trying to contact someone with more knowledge. But we were both scared of being labeled insane. That's where I am now, telling you all this. I haven't slept. I feel tired, but every time I blink, I think I see those shapes creeping in any surface that can reflect light. I'm scared they'll appear behind me or beside me. My friend is on his phone, searching for any explanation online, but we haven't found anything that helps. We're just stuck. I still can't see myself in a mirror. Those shapes appear at random, and they move like they want to replace me. I don't know if I can stop them. I feel like if I let my guard down, something bad will happen. My friend is trying to stay calm, but I see the fear in his eyes. Right now, I'm exhausted. My body aches from tension. My hands are shaky, and I keep swallowing hard because my mouth feels dry. I can't relax. I'm worried that any reflection might become a doorway for that distorted version of me to come through. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how it feels. I see it. I hear it tapping on glass, and I feel it watching me. I don't know how this ends. I only know I can't see my own face anymore, and these strange shapes are following me. They're in windows, puddles, phone screens, anything that can show a reflection. And they're always staring back at me with twisted movements. I'm scared they're going to take my place. I'm scared the next time I catch a glimpse of them, it might be too late. I'm telling you this because I have no one else who understands. I'm still here, but I'm missing from every mirror in the world, and I don't know if I'll ever get my reflection back.